She introduced me to her parents as her boyfriend, and I had no idea we were even dating. Daniel Brooks stood frozen in the doorway, candlelight flickering across a table set for four, while Rachel Monroe's mother embraced him like family. Her father's eyes cut through him like a blade through paper. In that moment, Daniel had two choices: expose the lie and humiliate his boss, or play along and risk everything he'd built as a single father. He chose wrong. If you want to see how one dinner destroyed and rebuilt a man's entire life, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let me know how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The alarm screamed at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was supposed to. Daniel Brooks didn't need to open his eyes to know what had happened. Small feet padded across the hardwood floor, and a moment later, a warm body crashed into his side with the force of a tiny meteor. "Daddy, I can't sleep anymore." He cracked one eye open. Lily was already dressed, if you could call it that. She wore her favorite purple tutu over pajama pants, a striped shirt that was definitely inside out, and one sock. Just one. "Lily, it's not even 6 yet." "But my brain is awake." She tapped her forehead with absolute certainty. "It told me so." Daniel groaned, but he was already sitting up, already reaching for her to pull her into a proper hug. This was the deal. This was the life. You didn't get to hit snooze when you were the only parent in the house. "Okay," he mumbled into her tangled hair. "Okay. Pancakes? With the faces?" "With the faces." She scrambled off the bed and thundered toward the kitchen, leaving Daniel alone for exactly 3 seconds of peace. He used those seconds to stare at the ceiling and remind himself that he was grateful. He was. Every single day, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, he was grateful. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that connected to a living room that connected to a dining area that was really just a corner with a table. But it was theirs. He'd painted Lily's room lavender himself, spent an entire weekend on his knees with a roller brush and a YouTube tutorial. He'd hung the fairy lights above her bed and assembled the bookshelf that now held 43 books, exactly, because Lily counted them every night before sleep. 43 books. 1 sock. A brain that woke up too early. This was his life. What? By 7:15, Lily was fed, properly dressed, both socks located, and buckled into her booster seat. Daniel drove the familiar route to Morningstar Academy, a preschool that cost more than his car payment, but had a teacher named Miss Penny who actually listened when Lily talked about her imaginary friend, Sparkle, the invisible dragon. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" "Do you think Sparkle gets lonely when I'm at school?" Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was staring out the window, her expression serious in that way only 4-year-olds could manage, like the weight of the universe rested on the answer. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that Sparkle probably takes naps when you're gone. Dragons need a lot of sleep." "Because of the fire breathing?" "Exactly. Very tiring." Lily nodded, satisfied. Crisis averted. He pulled into the drop-off lane and unbuckled her himself, ignoring the line of cars behind him. Some of the other parents waved from their windows, efficient and rushed. Daniel wasn't efficient. He knelt on the sidewalk and zipped Lily's jacket all the way up, even though she'd unzip it the second she got inside. "I love you," he said. "Have the best day." "I love you more." She kissed his cheek, a sloppy, wet thing that left a smear of maple syrup he wouldn't notice until his first meeting. "Bye, Daddy." And then she was gone, swallowed by the bright yellow doors of the school, and Daniel was alone again. He sat in his car for a moment, engine idling. The radio played something soft. He never changed the station anymore, just let it wash over him like background noise. His phone buzzed. Rachel Monroe. "Don't forget the Henderson file. Meeting at 9. He typed back. "Got it. Short. Professional. The way it had always been." Daniel had worked at Monroe Creative for 3 years. It was a mid-sized marketing firm, not glamorous but stable, which was exactly what he needed. Stability, predictability. A paycheck that arrived every 2 weeks and health insurance that covered Lily's ear infections and his own therapy sessions, back when he still went. He was a senior graphic designer, which sounded more impressive than it was. Mostly, he made things look pretty. Logos, brochures, social media campaigns. He was good at it. Good enough to keep his job, good enough to earn occasional praise, not good enough to stand out. Standing out was dangerous. Standing out meant attention, and attention meant questions. And questions meant explaining why he left every day at 5:30 sharp, why he couldn't do happy hour, why his emergency contact was a neighbor named Mrs. Patterson instead of a wife. He'd learned to be invisible. It was safer that way. The office was already buzzing when he arrived. Monroe Creative occupied the third floor of a glass building downtown, all open floor plans and exposed brick, the kind of place that tried very hard to look like a startup even though it had been around for 15 years. Daniel's desk was in the corner near the window, a strategic position that let him see who was coming without being in the direct line of foot traffic. He'd just settled into his chair when Marcus Chen rolled over on his wheeled stool, coffee in hand, grin already in place. "Heard you're having dinner with the boss tonight." Daniel's fingers froze over his keyboard. "What?" "Rachel. Dinner. Tonight." Marcus wiggled his eyebrows. "Don't play dumb. I saw the calendar invite." Daniel pulled up his email, scrolling frantically. There it was. An invitation he must have accepted without reading properly, buried between meeting reminders and spam. Subject: Dinner at my place. Testing a new recipe. From Rachel Monroe. Time, 7:00 p.m. His stomach dropped. "It's a work thing," he said, but even he didn't believe it. Rachel didn't invite people to her home. Rachel didn't cook. Rachel existed in the office like a force of nature, decisive, commanding, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "Sure it is?" Marcus patted his shoulder. "Good luck, man. And for the record, if this goes well, I expect a raise through association." Daniel didn't laugh. He was too busy staring at the calendar invite, trying to figure out what he'd gotten himself into. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines. The Henderson file was approved with minor revisions. A new client wanted a brand refresh by Friday. Impossible, but Daniel said yes anyway because saying no wasn't really an option. He ate lunch at his desk, a sad sandwich from the vending machine, and tried not to think about dinner. But Rachel made that impossible. She appeared at his desk around 2 p.m., which never happened. Rachel had an office with a door and glass walls that let her observe without participating. She didn't make rounds. She sent emails. "Daniel!" She was wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than his rent, her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but definitely wasn't. "I wanted to confirm tonight." "Right. Yeah. The recipe thing." He was suddenly very aware of the mustard stain on his tie. "I'm making risotto." She said it like a challenge, like risotto was a test he could fail. 7:00. Don't be late. I have to arrange childcare. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson." Rachel's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Already handled. I asked her assistant to reach out." Daniel blinked. "You asked about my babysitter?" "I ask about everything." She smiled then, quick and sharp. "See you tonight." She walked away before he could respond, heels clicking against the concrete floor like a countdown. Mrs. Patterson was 73 years old and had raised 5 children of her own, all of whom had grown up and moved away, leaving her with a quiet house and too much time. She'd started babysitting Lily 2 months after Daniel moved into the neighborhood, refusing payment until he finally wore her down with a combination of stubbornness and casseroles. A date? She was practically glowing when Daniel dropped Lily off at 6:15. "Daniel, that's wonderful." "It's not a date, it's dinner with my boss." "You're very attractive, boss." "She's my boss." "She's also very attractive." Lily tugged on Mrs. Patterson's sleeve. "What's attractive mean?" "It means pretty, dear." Mrs. Patterson winked at Daniel. "And your daddy's boss is very, very pretty." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, which probably looked like it hadn't been combed because it hadn't been combed. "Lily, be good for Mrs. Patterson. I'll pick you up by 9, okay?" "Okay, Daddy." But Lily was already distracted by Mrs. Patterson's cat, a fat orange thing named Muffin, who tolerated Lily's aggressive affection with the patience of a saint. Daniel kissed her forehead and fled. Rachel's house was not what he expected. She lived in a brownstone on the nice side of town, the kind of neighborhood where people had actual yards and dogs and seasonal decorations. Daniel parked his beat-up Honda Civic between a Tesla and a BMW, feeling distinctly out of place, and walked up to the front door. The doorbell was one of those smart ones with a camera. He resisted the urge to wave. Rachel opened the door, and for a moment Daniel forgot how to speak. She wasn't wearing work clothes. She was wearing jeans, and a soft white sweater that made her look like an actual human instead of a corporate machine. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders in waves he'd never seen before. "You came." She sounded almost surprised. "You invited me." "I did." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house smelled like garlic and butter and something rich and earthy. Candles flickered on the dining room table. Actual candles, in actual holders, like this was an actual occasion. Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Rachel, what is—" "Daniel!" A woman's voice, warm and welcoming, came from somewhere deeper in the house. "We've heard so much about you." He turned. A woman in her late 50s emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She had Rachel's eyes, dark, intelligent, assessing, but her smile was softer, more immediate. Behind her, a man appeared, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested military service or extreme discipline. Rachel's hand found Daniel's elbow, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Just go with it." "Go with what?" But before she could answer, the woman had crossed the room and pulled Daniel into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume and home cooking. "I'm Catherine," she said, pulling back to cup his face in her hands. "Rachel's mother, and this is Thomas, her father. We've been dying to meet the man who finally stole our daughter's heart." Daniel's brain short-circuited. Stole her heart? He looked at Rachel, desperate for explanation, but she was already moving toward the kitchen, calling over her shoulder, "I'm going to check the risotto. Mom, don't interrogate him before he's had wine." "I would never," Catherine laughed, warm and delighted, and looped her arm through Daniel's. "Now tell me everything. How did you two meet? Rachel never shares details." Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He was standing in his boss's house, being embraced by her mother, while her father watched from the corner with eyes that could cut glass. And apparently, he was Rachel Monroe's boyfriend. What had she done? Simam. Catherine Monroe was a talker. Within 5 minutes, Daniel learned that she'd been married to Thomas for 37 years, that she volunteered at the local hospital 3 days a week, and that she'd been worried about Rachel withering away at that office until she'd mentioned Daniel's name 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? Daniel managed. "You know how private she is." Catherine waved a hand. "Had to drag it out of her, but the moment she said Daniel, I could tell. A mother knows." Daniel nodded, feeling like he was watching himself from a great distance. His body was accepting wine and taking a seat at the candlelit table. His body was shaking Thomas Monroe's hand, a grip that could crush stone, and murmuring platitudes about what a lovely home they had. But his mind was screaming, 3 weeks. She'd been telling them about a boyfriend named Daniel for 3 weeks, which meant this wasn't spontaneous, this wasn't a misunderstanding, this was planned. Rachel returned with the risotto, plating it with the precision of a surgeon. She sat beside Daniel, close enough that their knees touched under the table, and smiled at him like he was someone she loved. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, loud enough for her parents to hear. Daniel held her gaze, smiled back, and whispered, so quiet only she could hear, "You're going to explain this later." After dessert, she patted his hand. "I made tiramisu. Check that." Dinner was exquisite. The risotto was perfect, creamy, rich, seasoned exactly right. There was a salad with vinaigrette Rachel had made herself, and bread that was warm and crusty and somehow still soft inside. Daniel ate without tasting, his attention split between answering Catherine's endless questions and trying to decode the silent conversation happening between Rachel and her father. Thomas hadn't spoken much. He'd asked about Daniel's work. "Senior graphic designer, is it?" in a tone that suggested he already knew and wasn't impressed. He'd asked about the company's trajectory, about growth projections, about where Daniel saw himself in 5 years. Work questions. Safe questions. The kind of questions that established hierarchy without openly insulting anyone. But Daniel could feel something building beneath the surface. Thomas was circling, looking for an opening, and Daniel knew with sickening certainty that the opening would come. So Daniel, Thomas set down his wine glass, the crystal catching the candlelight. Rachel tells us you have a daughter. There it was. I do. Daniel kept his voice steady. Lily, she's 4. And her mother? Thomas. Catherine's voice was sharp. We discussed this. It's a fair question. It's not a fair... It's okay. Daniel surprised himself with how calm he sounded. Her mother passed away when Lily was 6 months old. The table went silent. Catherine's hand flew to her chest. Even Thomas had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. I'm so sorry, Catherine whispered. Rachel didn't mention. It was a difficult time. Daniel took a breath. He'd told this story before, to teachers and doctors and the occasional nosy coworker. It never got easier, but he'd learned to package it, to make it palatable for polite company. Postpartum complications, she developed an infection that went septic. By the time we realized how serious it was, he trailed off. Rachel's hand found his under the table, and this time it didn't feel like an act. It's been almost 4 years, Daniel continued. Lily doesn't remember her. Sometimes I don't know if that's better or worse. It's neither. Catherine's eyes were wet. It simply is. And you're still here raising that child on your own. That's not nothing. Daniel nodded, grateful for her kindness, even as he felt the weight of Thomas's stare. It must be difficult, Thomas said. His tone was careful now, measured, but there was something predatory underneath. Single fatherhood, demanding career, and now a relationship? Dad. Rachel's voice was ice. I'm just curious how he plans to manage it all. Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Rachel's not the type to come second. She's ambitious, driven. She needs a partner who can match that. And forgive me, Daniel, but a man with your obligations... He paused, letting the silence fill with implication. How can you possibly offer her what she deserves? Daniel felt the familiar flush of shame, the automatic instinct to apologize, to shrink, to make himself smaller. He'd done it for years, in job interviews and parent groups, in the quiet judgments of strangers who saw a young man with a stroller and assumed the worst. But something was different tonight. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the way Rachel's hand gripped his under the table, tight and certain. Maybe it was the thought of Lily, asleep at Mrs. Patterson's house, trusting that her father would come back for her like he always did. Daniel straightened his spine. Mr. Monroe, he said, I don't think you're asking how I can offer Rachel what she deserves. I think you're asking why she should bother with someone like me. Thomas's eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. Here's the truth. Daniel released Rachel's hand and placed both of his palms flat on the table, a gesture of openness, of vulnerability. I'm not rich. I don't drive a nice car. I can't take your daughter to Europe on a whim or buy her jewelry that costs more than my annual salary. I go home at 5:30 every day because my daughter needs dinner and a bath and a bedtime story, and nothing will ever be more important to me than that. He paused, letting the words settle. But here's what I can offer. I show up. Every single day, no matter how tired I am, no matter how hard it gets, I show up. I don't make promises I can't keep. I don't disappear when things get difficult. And I know what it means to build something from nothing, to fight for a life you didn't expect but refused to give up on. Catherine was crying openly now. Thomas's expression was unreadable. Your daughter is remarkable, Daniel continued, glancing at Rachel, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't decode. She doesn't need someone to match her ambition. She needs someone who will stand beside her, not in front of her. Someone who understands that strength isn't about power, it's about endurance. He turned back to Thomas. You asked what I can offer. I can offer consistency. I can offer effort. I can offer a man who learned, through the hardest possible circumstances, that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about the small things done over and over until they become unshakable. The silence stretched. Daniel's heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He'd said too much. He'd overstepped. Thomas Monroe was going to eviscerate him with a single word, and tomorrow he'd probably be fired. But then Thomas did something unexpected. He smiled. It was small, reluctant, barely a curve of the lips, but it was there. "Well," Thomas said, reaching for his wine, "at least he has a spine." Catherine burst out laughing, the tension shattering like glass. Rachel exhaled beside him, and Daniel realized she'd been holding her breath. "I told you," Rachel said, and Daniel couldn't tell if she was speaking to him or her father. "I told you he was different." Thomas raised his glass in a motion that might have been a toast, might have been a challenge. "Different, perhaps, but different isn't always better. We'll see." Dessert was quiet. Catherine asked about Lily, her favorite color, purple, her favorite food, macaroni and cheese, but only if Daniel made it, her favorite bedtime story, anything with dragons. Daniel answered, feeling the evening shift around him. Thomas still watched, still assessed, but the hostility had dimmed into something more like curiosity. Rachel walked him to the door at 9:15. "You didn't have to do that," she said. The hallway was dark, the house settling into night around them. "What you said to my father. You didn't have to invite me as a surprise boyfriend." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "It started as a white lie. They kept pushing about my personal life, and your name came out. I didn't expect them to fly in to meet you. So this was damage control?" This was desperation. She leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking exhausted. "My mother has been planning my wedding since I was 12. My father thinks I'm too focused on work to have a real life. They were starting to think something was wrong with me." "Something wrong with you?" Daniel shook his head. "Rachel, you're the most put-together person I know." "Exactly." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I'm always put together, always in control, and they don't understand that I chose this, that my career is my passion, not my consolation prize. But they wouldn't listen. They kept saying I was lonely, that I was hiding. And then they announced they were coming to dinner, and I panicked." Daniel should have been angry. He should have demanded an apology, an explanation, a promise that this would never happen again. Instead, he thought about Lily, about all the times he'd smiled through exhaustion, pretended everything was fine, performed the role of the capable single father even when he was drowning. "Why me?" he asked. Rachel met his eyes. "Because you're the only person at that office who doesn't look at me like I'm either a conquest or a threat. Because you leave at 5:30 every day and you don't apologize for it, and that's, I don't know, refreshing. That's not a reason to drag me into a fake relationship." "I know." She reached out, touched his arm. "I owe you. I know I owe you. I'll find a way to explain to them that it didn't work out, and you won't have to deal with any of this again." Daniel looked at her, really looked. The polished exterior, the iron control, and beneath it all a woman just as terrified of being seen as he was. "Let me think about it," he said, "before you end anything." "What?" "I said let me think about it." He stepped back into the night air. "Good night, Rachel." He was halfway to his car when her voice stopped him. "Daniel?" He turned. She was standing in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of her home, looking nothing like his boss and everything like someone he didn't recognize. "Thank you," she said, "for what you said to my father, even if it was just acting." Daniel thought about the speech he'd given, the words that had poured out of him, unplanned and raw, the truth of them, the weight. "It wasn't," he said, "acting." He got in his car and drove away before she could respond. Mrs. Patterson was asleep on the couch when Daniel arrived, muffin curled at her feet. Lily was in the guest bedroom, clutching a stuffed bear that wasn't hers, but that Mrs. Patterson kept just for her. Daniel gathered his daughter carefully, trying not to wake her. She stirred anyway, burrowing into his chest. "Daddy?" "I'm here, baby. Let's go home." "Did you have fun at dinner?" He thought about the question, about Rachel's parents and the candlelight, and the moment he'd defended a relationship that didn't exist to a man who saw right through him. "Yeah," he said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "I think I did." Lily was asleep again before they reached the car. At home, Daniel tucked her into bed, checking the fairy lights, counting the 43 books, kissing her forehead the way he'd done every night for almost 4 years. Then he stood in the hallway, alone, and let himself feel everything he'd been suppressing. He was exhausted. He was confused. He was, against all reason, intrigued. Rachel Monroe had thrown a grenade into his carefully constructed life, and instead of running, some part of him wanted to see where the shrapnel landed. His phone buzzed. Rachel Monroe. Thank you again. I mean it. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. Daniel. What happens now? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Rachel. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Daniel set the phone down, walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water he didn't really need. Outside, the city hummed with distant traffic and the quiet sounds of neighbors settling into sleep. Inside, his daughter breathed softly, safe and warm, and completely unaware of the chaos unfolding in her father's heart. This was his life. Routine, survival, the fragile balance he'd spent years building, and now Rachel Monroe wanted to shake it all apart. The question was, would he let her? Botes. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the dinner like a film on loop. Thomas Monroe's cold assessment, Catherine's tearful warmth, Rachel's hand in his, and the way she'd looked at him in the hallway, like he was something she hadn't expected but couldn't quite look away from. What was he doing? He had a system. Wake up, make pancakes, drop Lily at school, work, pick Lily up, dinner, bath, bedtime stories, sleep. Repeat. The rhythm was everything. It kept him sane, kept him moving, kept the grief at bay. And now Rachel wanted to, what? Continue the charade? Turn the lie into something real? He thought about Meredith. It had been almost 4 years since she'd died. But some nights, the memory still knocked the breath out of him, the way she'd laughed at his terrible jokes. The plans they'd made, a bigger house, a second child, a life that stretched into forever. And then the fever that wouldn't break, and the doctors who spoke in careful euphemisms, and the moment he'd held her hand and felt it go still. Lily had been in the NICU, too small and fragile to understand that her mother was disappearing in a room 2 floors above. Daniel had split himself between them, rocking his daughter through the night, sitting vigil at his wife's bedside during the day, until there was nothing left of him but numbness and determination. He'd survived. That was the word he used, even now. Survived. Not thrived. Not healed. Just continued. And continuing meant not taking risks, not letting anyone close enough to shatter him again. So why was he even considering this? The next morning, Lily wanted waffles. You said pancakes yesterday, Daniel reminded her, already pulling ingredients from the cabinet. That was yesterday. Today is a waffle day. We don't have a waffle iron. Lily considered this devastating news. Then we should get one. With what money? The money in the piggy bank. Daniel laughed despite himself. Lily's piggy bank contained approximately $17 in loose change, collected 1 penny at a time from couch cushions and parking lots. Tell you what, he said, we'll put waffles on the wish list. For now, pancakes with extra chocolate chips? Lily sighed dramatically, but nodded. Fine, but make them in the shape of a dragon. I thought you wanted them with faces. That was yesterday, Daddy. Keep up. But work was complicated. Daniel arrived to find Marcus already hovering near his desk, practically vibrating with curiosity. Well, Marcus demanded, how was it? Did you survive? Did she murder you with a sauce whisk? Good morning to you too. Don't change the subject. I need details, specifics. Was there wine? There was definitely wine. What year? What region? Daniel sat down and pulled up his email, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. It was fine. Just dinner. Just dinner, right. Because the boss invites everyone to her house for just dinner. Marcus air-quoted aggressively. Come on, man, throw me a bone here. There's nothing to tell. Your face says otherwise. Daniel turned to face him fully. Marcus, I appreciate the curiosity, but I really don't want to talk about it. Something in his tone must have landed because Marcus backed off, hands raised in surrender. Okay, But if you change your mind, I'm here, with snacks and zero judgment. Noted. Marcus rolled away, and Daniel tried to focus on his screen. The Henderson revisions were waiting. A new brief had come in overnight. Something about a restaurant rebrand needed by EOD Friday. Normal work? Normal problems. But his gaze kept drifting to Rachel's office. She was in there, visible through the glass walls, on the phone with someone. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. Every few minutes, she'd type something or jot a note or nod in that decisive way she had. Completely professional, completely in control. Like last night had never happened. Daniel wasn't sure if he was relieved or disappointed. The day crawled. By noon, Daniel had finished the Henderson revisions and started sketches for the restaurant project. But his concentration was shot. Every time his phone buzzed, he expected it to be Rachel. Every time someone walked past his desk, he tensed. This was ridiculous. He was acting like a teenager with a crush, not a 32-year-old father with responsibilities. At 12:47, his phone did buzz. But it wasn't Rachel. Mrs. Patterson. Lily's school called. Nothing serious. She scraped her knee at recess. Nurse cleaned her up, but she's asking for you. Daniel was on his feet before he finished reading. He grabbed his bag, sent a quick email to his supervisor about a family emergency, and was in his car within 3 minutes. The drive to Morningstar Academy took 15 minutes in normal traffic. He made it in 9. Lily was in the nurse's office, perched on a cot with a bright pink bandage wrapped around her knee. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, and when she saw Daniel, her whole face crumpled with relief. "Daddy!" He crossed the room in 2 steps and scooped her up, holding her tight. Hey, it's okay. I'm here. I've got you." I fell off the monkey bars. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. Emma said I couldn't do the high ones, and I wanted to show her, and then I fell, and there was blood, and it hurt so much, Daddy. "I know, baby. I know." He pulled back to look at her, brushing hair from her face. "But you're so brave. Look at you. Not even crying anymore." I cried a little. "That's okay. Crying's allowed, especially when there's blood." The nurse, a kind-faced woman named Janet, who Daniel had met half a dozen times for various minor injuries, handed him a form to sign. "She's fine. The cut wasn't deep and we cleaned it thoroughly. Just keep it dry tonight, and maybe an ice cream wouldn't hurt." Lily's eyes lit up. "Ice cream?" Daniel shot Janet a look that was half gratitude, half exasperation. "Thanks for that." "Anytime, They got ice cream." Of course they did. Lily sat in the passenger seat of the Honda, car seat removed for the special occasion because she was very big now and had earned it, and worked through a cone of strawberry swirl with methodical focus. Daniel watched her, his own vanilla untouched. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "Why did you look so worried when you came in?" He considered lying. Considered saying he always looked worried, or that it was just the drive, or any of the small untruths parents told to shield their children from unnecessary weight. But Lily was watching him with those big, serious eyes, and he remembered what Meredith used to say. "Kids know. They always know." "Because I love you," he said simply. "And when you're hurt, even a little bit, it's like I'm hurt too. That's how love works." Lily thought about this. "So when I fall down, you fall down inside?" "Something like that." "That seems hard." "It is sometimes." "But you still love me anyway?" "I'll love you anyway forever, no matter what." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her ice cream. Daniel finally took a bite of his own, letting the cold sweetness ground him in the present moment. This was why he'd built his life the way he had. This was why routine mattered. Why he didn't take risks, why he came home at 5:30 every single day, because this little girl needed him, and he would never, ever let her down. By the time they got home, Lily's knee was forgotten in favor of more pressing concerns, specifically whether Sparkle the invisible dragon would approve of her bandage. "Dragons like pink, right, Daddy?" "I think dragons like whatever color you tell them to like." "Okay. Then Sparkle likes pink and purple and maybe a little bit of gold." That's a very stylish dragon. Lily beamed and ran off to her room to show Sparkle the bandage in person. Daniel started dinner, mac and cheese, the homemade kind, because his daughter deserved comfort food after a hard day. He was stirring the cheese sauce when his phone buzzed. Rachel Monroe. I heard you left early. Everything okay? He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, Daniel. Lily scraped her knee. She's fine now. 3 dots. Then, Rachel. Good. Kids are resilient. Daniel. They have to be. A pause. Then, Rachel. Can we talk? Not about last night. About something else. Daniel's stomach tightened. He glanced toward Lily's room, where he could hear her narrating an elaborate story to her invisible dragon. Daniel. I have Lily tonight. Rachel. I know. Tomorrow then. Lunch? He should say no. Should draw the line, maintain the boundary, protect the routine that kept him safe. But he thought about the way Rachel had looked at him in the hallway, the way she'd said different, the way for just a moment she'd seemed as lost as he felt. Daniel. Okay. Rachel. Thank you. He put the phone down and stirred the cheese sauce until it was perfect, smooth and golden and exactly the way Lily liked it. Epis. That night, after dinner and bath time and 3 bedtime stories, 2 about dragons, 1 about a princess who saved herself, Daniel sat alone in the living room and let himself think. About Meredith. About the life they'd planned and the life he'd built instead. About Rachel. About the impossible situation she'd created and the even more impossible way he felt about it. About Lily. About the 43 books and the 1 sock and the brain that woke up too early. He didn't have answers. He wasn't sure he even had the right questions yet. But for the first time in almost 4 years, Daniel Brooks felt something other than survival. He felt possibility. And he wasn't sure if that terrified him or saved him. The next morning, Lily's brain woke up on time. Daddy? She was standing in his doorway, fully dressed, both socks matching. I'm ready for school. Daniel blinked at the clock. 6:42 a.m. This was unprecedented. Who are you and what have you done with my daughter? Lily giggled. I wanted to surprise you. Mission accomplished. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. Pancakes? With dragon shapes? Always. They moved through the morning routine together. Breakfast, toothbrushing, the eternal search for matching shoes. By 7:30, Lily was buckled into her car seat, chattering about Emma and the monkey bars, and how she was definitely going to try again tomorrow because dragons don't give up. Daniel smiled and drove and tried not to think about lunch with Rachel. He failed. Noon arrived like a verdict. Daniel met Rachel at a cafe 3 blocks from the office, far enough to avoid curious coworkers, but close enough to make the meeting feel casual. She was already there when he arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 menus and an expression he couldn't read. Hi, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Hi. She pushed one of the menus toward him. I ordered water. I wasn't sure what you'd want. Water's fine. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe buzzing around them with the sounds of other people's conversations. Finally, Rachel spoke. I talked to my mother this morning. Daniel's stomach dropped. And? She adores you. She's already planning the wedding. She asked me what kind of flowers you like. What did you tell her? That I'd have to ask. Rachel's lips twitched. I deflected. I'm good at that. What about your father? He's reserving judgment. She picked up her water glass, rotated it slowly between her palms. He called you interesting. Coming from him, that's practically a marriage proposal. Daniel laughed despite himself. Interesting. That's one word for it. He also said you have spine, which is the highest compliment he gives. Rachel set the glass down and met his eyes. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. Last night, when you said that thing to my father about showing up, about consistency, about what you could offer, she paused, searching his face. Were you talking about me? Or about Lily? The question hit him like a physical blow. Because the truth was, he didn't know. The truth was, the words had come from somewhere deep and unexamined, a place he'd kept locked since Meredith died. Both, he said finally. Neither. I don't know. Rachel nodded, like this was the answer she'd expected. I'm not looking for a relationship. I need you to understand that. My life is complicated. Work is everything to me. I don't have room for… Rachel. He held up a hand. I'm a single father with a 4-year-old. I don't have room for anything either. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Daniel thought about the question, about the dinner and the deception, and the strange, unexpected connection that had formed between them. I think, he said slowly, it's about two people who are really good at being alone, realizing that alone isn't the same as okay. Rachel stared at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she laughed, a real laugh, unexpected and almost startled. That's either the most insightful thing I've ever heard, she said, or the worst pickup line in history. Probably both. She shook her head, but she was smiling now. So what do we do? I have no idea. Daniel picked up his menu, pretending to study it. But maybe we could start with lunch. Lunch, Rachel repeated. I can do lunch. Good. He looked up at her and something in his chest loosened. Just a little, just enough. Then let's start there. They ordered, they ate, they talked about work and weather and the absolutely insane amount of sugar in children's breakfast cereals. Normal things. Safe things. But underneath it all, something had shifted. Daniel didn't know what to call it. Didn't know if it had a future or if it would collapse under the weight of everything they weren't saying. But for the first time in almost 4 years, he wasn't just surviving, he was starting to live. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, Daniel stood at the window and watched the city lights blink in the distance. His phone buzzed. Rachel Monroe, thank you for today. I needed that. He typed back. Daniel. Me too. Then after a moment, Daniel. Same time Friday, 3 dots. Then, Rachel. I'd like that. Daniel smiled in the dark, set the phone down, and for the first time in a very long time, went to bed without dreading the morning. 3 weeks passed and Daniel discovered something strange. Happiness could be terrifying. Friday lunches became a ritual. He and Rachel would meet at the same cafe, same corner table, and talk about everything except what was actually happening between them. They discussed work projects and weekend plans and the absurd price of organic produce. Rachel asked about Lily's latest dragon adventures. Daniel asked about the merger rumors circulating through the office. They laughed more than either of them expected, and then they would return to work, walk to their separate spaces, and pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Daniel noticed it in small ways at first, the way Rachel's eyes would find his during meetings, a flicker of something private passing between them. The way she started stopping by his desk with questions she could easily have sent by email. The way his heart rate picked up whenever his phone buzzed with her name. He noticed it at home, too. The mornings felt lighter. He caught himself humming while making breakfast, something he hadn't done in years. Even Lily noticed. Daddy, you're smiling a lot, she said one morning, studying him over her cereal bowl. Am I? Yes, your face is different. It's like sunnier. Daniel laughed and kissed the top of her head. Maybe the sun is just brighter these days. That doesn't make sense, Lily said, with the devastating logic of a 4-year-old. The sun is always the same brightness. We learned that in school. Did you now? Miss Penny showed us a video. The sun is very hot and very far away, and it never changes. Well, Daniel said, scooping up their empty bowls, maybe Daddy is just happy. Lily considered this. Why? Because I met someone who makes me feel like myself again, he thought. Because for the first time since your mother died, I don't feel like I'm just going through the motions. But he couldn't say that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because I have you, he said instead. That's plenty of reason. Lily smiled, satisfied with this answer, and ran off to find her shoes. Daniel watched her go, feeling the familiar ache of love and fear that came with fatherhood. He was building something fragile here, something that could shatter if he wasn't careful. The question was whether he was willing to risk it. The answer, terrifyingly, was yes. On the fourth Friday, Rachel arrived at the cafe looking different. Her usual composure was cracked around the edges, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "You look exhausted," Daniel said before he could stop himself. Charming as always. But she smiled as she sat down, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "It's been a week. Want to talk about it?" Rachel hesitated. In the 3 weeks they'd been doing this, she'd been careful to keep certain things separate. Work stayed at work. Family stayed in the past. The lunches were a neutral zone, a pocket of space where neither of them had to be anything other than two people sharing a meal. But something had shifted. Daniel could see it in the way she held herself, the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at her phone like she expected bad news. "My father's in town," she said finally. Daniel's stomach clenched. "Again?" "Again. He says it's for business, but I know better. He's checking up on me, on us." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He called yesterday to ask if you were still in the picture." Those were his exact words. "In the picture." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him we were taking things slow, that we're both busy professionals with complicated lives, that he needed to stop treating my relationships like quarterly reports." "How'd he take that?" "About as well as you'd expect." Rachel picked up her water glass, set it down without drinking. "He wants to have dinner, the three of us. This Sunday." The word hit Daniel like a brick. Dinner. With Thomas Monroe, the man who had looked at him like a problem to be solved, who had questioned his worth and his capabilities and his right to be in Rachel's life. "I know," Rachel said, reading his expression. "I told him it was too soon, that we weren't ready for another family inquisition. But he's insistent. That's one word for it. He's concerned." She said it like an apology. "In his own way. He thinks I'm making a mistake. He thinks you're a distraction from my career, and he's worried I'm going to throw everything away for what he considers a fling." Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. "Is that what this is? A fling?" "No." Rachel's voice was firm. "That's not what I said. But that's what he thinks. What he thinks doesn't matter. It matters to you." Daniel kept his voice gentle, but the words landed anyway. "Rachel, I've seen how you are with him. You care about his opinion more than you want to admit." She was quiet for a long moment. The cafe chattered around them, oblivious to the tension at their corner table. "He wasn't always like this," she said finally. "When I was a kid, he was different, softer. He used to read me bedtime stories and take me to the park and tell me I could be anything I wanted." She paused, something painful flickering across her face. "And then I grew up, and I became exactly what he raised me to be. Ambitious, driven, focused. And somehow, that's still not enough." "Enough for what?" "For him to stop worrying, stop managing, stop treating my life like a project he needs to oversee." She looked at Daniel, and he saw something raw in her eyes, something she usually kept hidden. "I'm 34 years old, and he still doesn't trust me to make my own decisions." Daniel understood that more than she knew, the weight of other people's expectations, the constant feeling of being watched, judged, found wanting. He'd lived it for years, in the pitying looks of other parents, in the subtle assumptions of colleagues, in the way strangers would see him with Lily and assume there must be a mother somewhere, some adult woman handling the real work. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to tell him to stay out of my life." Rachel's voice was sharp, then softened. "But I can't. He's my father, and he means well, even when he's being impossible." "Then we'll do dinner." Rachel blinked. "What?" "Sunday, your father, the three of us." Daniel shrugged, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "If he needs to see that I'm not going anywhere, then let's show him." "Daniel, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "But I want to. Whatever this is between us, I'm not interested in hiding from it, and I'm definitely not interested in letting your father scare me off." Rachel stared at him. For a moment, she looked almost young, uncertain, hopeful, nothing like the commanding executive who ran conference rooms with an iron will. "You're either very brave," she said, "or very stupid. Probably both." She laughed, really laughed, and something in the air between them shifted. Sunday then, 7 o'clock, my place again. I'll be there. And Daniel? She finally let her fingers brush his, just for a moment. Thank you. He carried that touch with him for the rest of the day. It was small, barely there, but it meant something. It meant she was willing to be vulnerable. It meant she was choosing him, even when that choice was hard. It meant, against all odds, that this was real. The weekend came too fast. Saturday morning, Daniel woke to Lily climbing into his bed at her usual too early hour. She was wearing her purple tutu again, this time over mismatched pajamas. Daddy, I had a dream about Sparkle. Yeah? What happened? She saved a princess from a tower, but the princess didn't want to be saved. She wanted to learn how to fly by herself. Daniel pulled her close, inhaling the sweet smell of her shampoo. That sounds like a very independent princess. Miss Penny says independent means doing things yourself. Miss Penny is very smart. I know. Lily wiggled free and sat up, studying his face with that unsettling intensity she sometimes had. Daddy, are you nervous? About what? About tomorrow. Mrs. Patterson said you have a big dinner tomorrow. She said it was very important. Daniel made a mental note to have a conversation with Mrs. Patterson about information sharing. It's just dinner, baby, with a friend from work. The pretty lady? He paused. What pretty lady? The one you think about when you're making breakfast. Your face gets all soft, like when you read me dragon stories. Daniel stared at his daughter, stunned. 4 years old, and she could read him better than anyone. Her name is Rachel, he said finally. And yes, she's going to be at the dinner with her dad. Is her dad nice? He's cares about her a lot. That's what dads do. Lily nodded, accepting this. Like how you care about me? Exactly like that. So he just wants to make sure you're a good person? Daniel blinked. Sometimes his daughter's insight was almost supernatural. Yeah, Lily, that's exactly what he wants. Well, you are a good person. She said it with absolute certainty, like stating a fact about the sun being hot or the sky being blue. You're the best person. He'll see that. Daniel's throat tightened. He gathered her into a hug, holding on maybe a little too tight. I love you, he whispered. You know that, right? I know, Daddy. She patted his back with her small hand. I love you more. Sunday arrived with the inevitability of a train. Daniel spent the morning cleaning an already clean house, more to burn nervous energy than out of any real need. Lily watched him with amusement, offering commentary from her perch on the couch. You already wiped that counter 3 times. I want it to be clean. It's very clean. You could eat off it. That's what Mrs. Patterson says when something is very clean. Good. Are you going to wear something nice? Daniel paused, rag in hand. What's wrong with what I'm wearing? Lily tilted her head, examining his jeans and faded t-shirt. Nothing, but if it's a fancy dinner, maybe you should wear the shirt with buttons, the blue one. You think so? Sparkle thinks so too. Daniel couldn't argue with a dragon. By 6:30, he was dressed in the blue button-down, freshly shaved, and sitting in Mrs. Patterson's living room while she fussed over Lily's overnight bag. I packed extra snacks, Mrs. Patterson said, pressing a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers into his hands. And her purple pajamas, and the stuffed bear. She won't sleep without the bear. I know. And you'll call if you need me to keep her longer? It's just dinner. I'll be back by 9. Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. It's never just dinner when fathers are involved. Daniel couldn't argue with that either. Lily hugged him tightly at the door, her small arms squeezing with surprising force. Good luck, Daddy. Thank you, baby. I'll see you in a few hours. Tell Rachel I said hi. How do you know it's Rachel? Lily rolled her eyes with the exasperation only a 4-year-old could muster. Because you only look that scared when something matters. She disappeared into Mrs. Patterson's house before he could respond, leaving Daniel standing on the doorstep, absolutely floored by his daughter's perception. He drove to Rachel's house with the radio off, the silence giving him too much space to think. His palms were sweating against the steering wheel. His heart was beating too fast. He felt like he was heading into battle, not dinner. But then again, with Thomas Monroe, dinner probably was battle. Rachel opened the door before he could knock. She was wearing a simple black dress, elegant but understated, and her hair was swept up in a way that made her look softer than usual. Vulnerable, almost. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might come to your senses." She stepped back to let him in. "There's still time to run." "I don't run." Daniel stepped over the threshold, and the door closed behind him with the finality of a seal. "Not anymore." Thomas Monroe was waiting in the living room. He stood by the fireplace, unlit, purely decorative, with a glass of whiskey in his hand and an expression that could freeze water. Catherine was nowhere to be seen. "Mom couldn't make it," Rachel said, as if reading Daniel's thoughts. "Something came up with the hospital benefit. It'll just be the three of us." Just the three of them. Daniel and Rachel and the man who had made it abundantly clear that he considered Daniel unworthy of his daughter. Perfect. "Mr. Monroe." Daniel extended his hand. "Good to see you again." Thomas took the handshake, his grip just shy of painful. "Daniel, I'm glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it." "Wouldn't you?" Thomas released his hand and turned to settle into an armchair, gesturing for Daniel to take the couch. "I imagine a man with your responsibilities has plenty of reasons to avoid uncomfortable situations." "Dad," Rachel's voice was sharp, "I'm just making conversation." Thomas took a sip of his whiskey, watching Daniel over the rim. "Tell me, how is your daughter? Lily, isn't it?" "She's wonderful." Daniel kept his voice even, refusing to rise to the bait. "She's 4 now, smart, curious, obsessed with dragons. She told me this morning that I needed to wear a nice shirt because Sparkle thinks so." "Sparkle?" "Her invisible dragon." Thomas's expression flickered. Not quite a smile, but something close. "An invisible dragon? That's creative." "She's very imaginative. Gets it from her mother." The room went quiet. Daniel hadn't meant to mention Meredith. The words had just slipped out, a reflex born from years of answering questions about Lily. Rachel stepped in smoothly, her hand finding Daniel's shoulder. "Should we move to the dining room? The roast is almost ready." Dinner was tense. The roast was excellent. Rachel had clearly spent hours on it, but Daniel barely tasted it. He was too busy navigating the conversational minefield that Thomas laid out with precision. "So," Thomas set down his fork, dabbing at his mouth with a cloth napkin. "Rachel tells me you've been seeing quite a bit of each other." "We have." "Lunches, dinners, time that could be spent on more productive pursuits." "I'd argue that getting to know each other is productive." "Would you?" Thomas leaned back, crossing his arms. "And how do you define productivity, Daniel? Because from where I'm sitting, I see a man who leaves work every day at 5:30, who takes personal calls during business hours, who prioritizes his child over his career advancement." "You say that like it's a criticism." "I say it like it's a fact, one that concerns me." "Dad," Rachel's voice was strained, "we talked about this." "You talked? I listened. That doesn't mean I agreed." Thomas turned his attention fully to Daniel, and there was something almost predatory in his gaze. "You seem like a decent man, I'll give you that. But decency doesn't build empires. Decency doesn't secure futures. And my daughter deserves someone who can match her ambition, not someone who's content with mediocrity." The word hit like a slap. Mediocrity. Daniel felt the old shame rising, the familiar urge to shrink and apologize and make himself smaller. He'd spent years fighting that instinct, but it never fully went away. And then he thought of Lily, he thought of her sitting on Mrs. Patterson's couch, telling him that he was the best person. He thought of her faith in him, absolute and unwavering. He thought of all the mornings he'd made pancakes with dragon shapes, all the nights he'd read stories until his voice went hoarse, all the moments, big and small, that had built a life he was proud of. "Mr. Monroe," Daniel said, and his voice was steady. "I'm going to be honest with you." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "By all means." "You're right. I'm not ambitious the way you define ambition. I don't work 80-hour weeks. I don't chase promotions at the expense of everything else. I go home at 5:30 because my daughter needs me, and I take personal calls because she's the most important thing in my life." He paused, letting the words settle. "But that doesn't make me mediocre." It makes me present. It makes me reliable. It makes me the kind of man who knows what really matters and isn't afraid to prioritize it. Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel wasn't finished. You want to know what I can offer your daughter? I can offer her stability. I can offer her someone who shows up every single day, even when it's hard. I can offer her honesty, loyalty, and a partnership built on respect, not competition. Daniel leaned forward, meeting Thomas's gaze directly. I know I'm not what you imagined for Rachel. I don't have a corner office or a stock portfolio or a name that opens doors, but I have something that matters more than any of that. I have integrity, and I have the capacity to love someone fully, without conditions, without keeping score. The room was silent. Rachel had gone very still beside him, her hand finding his under the table. Thomas stared at him for a long moment. Daniel couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he'd made things better or catastrophically worse. And then Thomas Monroe did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a short sound, almost startled, like it had escaped against his will. He shook his head, reaching for his whiskey. Rachel said you had spine. I didn't believe her. Dad! No, let me finish. Thomas took a long sip, then set the glass down with a decisive click. I've spent 30 years building a business. I've met every kind of man you can imagine. Sycophants, opportunists, climbers, cowards. And you know what most of them have in common? Daniel waited. They tell me what they think I want to hear. They make promises they have no intention of keeping. They smile and nod and agree with every word that comes out of my mouth. Thomas leaned forward, something almost like respect flickering in his eyes. You're the first person in a very long time who's told me to my face that I'm wrong. I didn't say you were wrong. You said my definition of ambition was limited. That's the same thing. Thomas waved a hand. I'm not saying I agree with you. I'm not saying I approve of this, whatever this is, but I respect a man who stands his ground. That's not nothing. Daniel didn't know how to respond. He'd expected anger, dismissal, another attack on his inadequacy. Not this. I'm still watching you, Thomas continued. Don't think for a second that one pretty speech changes my mind, but I'm willing to reserve judgment. For now. He turned to Rachel and something in his face softened, just slightly, just enough to glimpse the father underneath the executive. You could do worse, he said. I'll give you that. Rachel's hand tightened on Daniel's. Thanks, Dad. Don't thank me yet. I still think you're making things unnecessarily complicated. Thomas picked up his fork and returned to his roast. But you're an adult. You get to make your own mistakes. Gee, thanks. You're welcome. And just like that, the tension broke. Not disappeared. Thomas Monroe wasn't the type to let things go easily, but shifted into something more manageable. They finished dinner with something approaching normal conversation. Thomas asked about Daniel's work, actually listening to the answers this time. Daniel asked about Thomas's business, and was surprised to find genuine intelligence behind the bravado. By the time dessert was served, a chocolate mousse that Rachel definitely hadn't made herself, Daniel was almost relaxed. Almost. Rachel walked him to the door at 9:15, just like before, but this time something was different. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. That was... Daniel trailed off, searching for the right word. Intense? I was going to say terrifying, but intense works too. Rachel laughed, leaning against the doorframe. You were incredible. I've never seen anyone talk to my father like that. I'm pretty sure I blacked out for part of it. Some kind of survival instinct. Whatever it was, it worked. She reached out, straightening his collar even though it didn't need straightening. He respects you, I could tell. He said he was reserving judgment. Coming from him, that's practically a marriage proposal. Daniel caught her hand, holding it against his chest. He could feel his own heartbeat, fast and uneven. Rachel, he said. What are we doing? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. I don't know. I've never done this before. Done what? Let someone in. She looked at him, and there was something raw in her eyes, something she usually kept locked away. I've spent my whole life building walls, being strong, being in control. And then you showed up, with your daughter and your pancakes and your speeches about integrity, and suddenly the walls don't feel as important anymore. Daniel's throat tightened. I'm scared too, you know. You? Scared? Terrified. He pulled her a little closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. The last time I let myself love someone, I lost her. And it almost destroyed me. The idea of going through that again. Hey, Rachel's free hand came up to cup his face. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not asking for guarantees, I'm just asking for a chance. A chance, Daniel repeated, to see where this goes. To figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just us. Daniel looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had thrown his life into chaos with a single dinner invitation. At the woman who had stood beside him while her father picked him apart. At the woman who was, despite everything, choosing him. Okay, he said. Okay? Us, together, figuring it out. He smiled, feeling something warm unfurl in his chest. I can do that. Rachel smiled back, and it was the most genuine expression he'd ever seen on her face. Good, because I wasn't really giving you a choice. She kissed him then, quick and soft, barely more than a brush of lips, and stepped back before he could react. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Rachel. He drove home with the radio still off, but the silence felt different now. Fuller. Like it was holding space for something new. Lily was asleep when he picked her up from Mrs. Patterson's. She didn't stir when he carried her to the car, didn't wake when he tucked her into bed. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, counting the fairy lights, feeling the weight of everything he was building. A life. A real one. Not just survival, but something more. His phone buzzed. Rachel. Thank you for tonight. My father just texted me. He said, and I quote, "The kid's not completely hopeless." Daniel laughed in the dark. Daniel. High praise. Rachel. The highest. He's basically planning our wedding now. Daniel. Let's maybe get through another dinner first. Rachel. Deal. Next Friday? Daniel. I'll be there. He set the phone down and went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time, he fell asleep with a smile on his face. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of beautiful. Daniel and Rachel settled into a rhythm. Lunches became dinners. Dinners became weekends. Slowly, carefully, they built something together, not the grand romance of movies, but something quieter and more real. Rachel met Lily on a Saturday afternoon in late October. Daniel had agonized over the timing for weeks, terrified that it was too soon, that Lily wouldn't understand, that he was making a mistake he couldn't take back. But Rachel had been patient. She'd let him set the pace, never pushing, always asking. And when he'd finally said yes, she'd shown up at his door with a stuffed dragon she'd found at some boutique toy shop, purple and sparkly and perfect. For Lily, she'd said, suddenly looking nervous. I hope it's okay. I didn't know if she already had a purple dragon, but you said purple was her favorite color. And Rachel. Daniel had taken her hand, steadying her. It's perfect. And it was. Lily had studied Rachel with the intensity of a scientist examining a new specimen. She'd ask questions. Are you Daddy's friend? Do you like dragons? Can you do the voices when you read stories? And Rachel had answered each one seriously, without condescension. By the end of the afternoon, they were sitting on Lily's bedroom floor, making up stories about Sparkle and the new dragon, whose name was Glitter because obviously. Daniel had watched from the doorway, heart so full it hurt, but the happiness came with complications. At work, rumors started circulating. Nothing overt. Rachel was too careful for that, but whispers in break rooms, meaningful looks in meetings. People noticed that Daniel left for lunch every Friday at the same time. They noticed Rachel stopping by his desk, her usual briskness softened into something else. They noticed, and they talked. Marcus was the first to say it out loud. So, he cornered Daniel by the coffee machine one morning, eyebrows raised. You and the boss, huh? I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Marcus grinned. Look, I'm not judging. She's terrifying, but in like a hot way. I respect it. Marcus, I'm just saying, If the rumors are true, you might want to be careful. Not everyone's going to be as supportive as me. Daniel knew he was right. Office relationships were complicated enough without the power dynamic of dating your boss. People would assume things, that he was using Rachel for advancement, that she was showing favoritism, that neither of them could be trusted to be professional. He brought it up at dinner that night. People are talking, he said, pushing pasta around his plate. At work. About us. Rachel nodded, unsurprised. I know. I've heard. Does it bother you? Does it bother you? Daniel considered the question. Did it bother him? The whispers, the assumptions, the unspoken judgment? I've spent my whole life being judged, he said finally, for being a young father, for being a single dad, for not fitting whatever mold people thought I should fit. I thought I'd gotten used to it. But this is different. How? Because it's not just me anymore. He met her eyes across the table. If this goes wrong, it affects both of us. Your reputation, my job, everything we've built. Rachel set down her fork. Do you want to stop? Keep things professional until we figure out what this is? No. The answer came immediately, without hesitation. I don't want to hide. I just want to be smart about it. Smart how? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together, right? That's what we said, us figuring it out. Rachel smiled, reaching for his hand. Yeah, that's what we said. They didn't figure it out that night, or the next, but they kept trying, kept talking, kept showing up for each other even when it was hard. And slowly, the rumors lost their power. People got used to seeing them together. The whispers faded into background noise. There were still challenges. Thomas Monroe remained skeptical, requiring regular proof that Daniel was serious about Rachel. Lily had her moments of confusion, asking questions Daniel didn't always know how to answer. Work got complicated when a major client specifically requested Daniel on a project, and suddenly everyone was wondering if Rachel had played favorites. She hadn't. The client had seen Daniel's work at a conference 2 years earlier and remembered his name. But the suspicion lingered, and Daniel spent weeks proving himself, working harder than he ever had to show that his success was earned. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. It was somehow exactly what he needed. Because every challenge that came their way, they faced together. Every obstacle became an opportunity to build trust. Every argument, and there were arguments, heated ones, ended with them closer than before. By November, Daniel understood something he hadn't let himself believe for almost 4 years. He was in love. Not the desperate, consuming love of his 20s. Not the grief-tinged memory of what he'd had with Meredith. Something new, something steady, something that felt, against all odds, like it might actually last. He told Rachel on a Thursday night, after Lily was asleep and they were sitting on his small couch, watching a movie neither of them was really watching. I love you. The words came out simpler than he'd expected. No preamble, no build-up, just truth. Rachel went very still. For a terrible moment, Daniel thought he'd made a mistake, gone too fast, said too much, broken whatever fragile thing they'd been building. And then she turned to him, eyes bright with something he couldn't name. I love you too, she said. I have for a while now. You have? Since the first dinner, when you stood up to my father. She laughed, the sound slightly wet. I thought, this is either the bravest man I've ever met or the stupidest. And then I realized it didn't matter. Either way, I wanted him. Daniel pulled her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, not needing to, just together, just us. He thought of Lily, asleep in her room with 43 books and a new purple dragon. He thought of Meredith, gone but not forgotten. A ghost he was finally learning to carry instead of being crushed by. He thought of all the small moments that had led to this. The lunches, the dinners, the conversations, the fights, the laughter. He thought of Thomas Monroe saying, the kid's not completely hopeless. He thought of Rachel in his arms, loving him back. And for the first time in almost 4 years, Daniel Brooks felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. But life has a way of testing happiness, of finding the cracks and prying them open. The test came in early December, wrapped in a phone call Daniel never expected. He was at work when his cell buzzed, an unfamiliar number with a local area code. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Is this Daniel Brooks?" Speaking. "Mr. Brooks, this is Principal Henderson at Morningstar Academy. There's been an incident with your daughter." Everything after that was a blur. He was in his car before he realized he'd left his coat. He was at the school in 10 minutes, running through the doors like the building was on fire. The secretary pointed him toward the nurse's office, and when he saw Lily sitting on the cot, his entire world collapsed and reformed in a single instant. She was crying, not the dramatic tears of a scraped knee, but real crying, deep, shuddering sobs that shook her whole body. "Lily." He was across the room in 3 steps, pulling her into his arms. "Baby, what happened?" "Daddy." Her voice was muffled against his chest. "They were mean. The kids were so mean." The nurse, Janet again, handed Daniel a box of tissues and quietly explained. There had been a family tree project. Each child was supposed to draw their family, parents, siblings, pets. Lily had drawn herself, Daniel, and 2 dragons, Sparkle and Glitter. One of the other children had asked where her mom was. Lily had said her mom was in heaven. And the child had laughed. Said Lily was lying. Said everyone had a mom, and if Lily didn't have one, something must be wrong with her. The teacher had intervened, but the damage was done. Lily had been inconsolable for the past hour. Daniel held his daughter and felt something crack inside him. This was the thing he'd always feared. The moment when his best efforts wouldn't be enough to protect her from the cruelty of the world. "Listen to me," he said, pulling back to look at her tear-streaked face. "There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing. Our family is different, and that's okay. Different doesn't mean broken. But everyone else has a mom." Lily's voice was small, devastated. "Why don't I have a mom?" Daniel took a breath. He'd known this question would come someday. He just hadn't been prepared for it to come now, in a nurse's office, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and his daughter's heart shattered on the floor. "You had a mom," he said carefully. "Her name was Meredith. She loved you so much, Lily, more than anything in the whole world." "Then why did she leave?" "She didn't leave, not by choice." Daniel's voice cracked, but he pushed through. "She got very sick, and the doctors couldn't make her better. She didn't want to go. She wanted to stay with you forever." "But she's gone now." "Her body is gone, but she's still with us in other ways." He touched Lily's chest, right over her heart. "Every time you're brave or kind or curious, that's her. That's the best parts of her, living in you." Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she looked up at him with those 2 old eyes. "Are you sad, Daddy, that she's gone?" Daniel thought about the question, about Meredith's laugh, her terrible puns, the way she'd looked at Lily in those first few hours after birth, exhausted and radiant and so full of love it seemed to glow. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but mostly I'm grateful. Grateful that I got to know her. Grateful that she gave me you." He pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Lily Brooks. Don't ever forget that." Lily sniffled, but something in her expression shifted. The devastation was still there, but underneath it something else was growing, something that looked almost like hope. "Daddy? Yeah, baby? Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Daniel laughed, a wet, relieved sound that was half sob. "Yeah," he said. "We can definitely get ice cream." He texted Rachel from the car. Lily had a rough day, might need to take some time. Her response came immediately. "Whatever you need. I'm here." 3 words. Simple. Certain. Daniel looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, still clutching the tissue the nurse had given her, and felt something settle in his chest. They would be okay. All of them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks following the incident at school left a mark on Daniel that he hadn't expected. He found himself watching Lily more closely, searching for cracks in her armor, waiting for the questions he knew would eventually come. She seemed okay most days, bouncing back with the resilience that children somehow possessed. But there were moments, quiet ones, usually at bedtime, when she would ask about her mother. What was her favorite color? Green, like spring leaves. What did her voice sound like? Soft, musical. She used to sing to you when you were a baby. Did she love dragons too? She would have loved Sparkle. She would have made up the best stories about her. Each answer was a gift and a wound, opening doors to memories Daniel had kept carefully sealed. But Lily needed them, needed to build a picture of the woman she would never know. And so he gave her what he could, piece by piece, until the ghost of Meredith became something less like grief and more like heritage. Rachel noticed the change in him. Of course she did. She noticed everything. "You've been quiet lately," she said one evening when Lily was asleep and they were sitting on his couch with glasses of wine neither of them was drinking. "More than usual." "Just thinking." "About?" Daniel stared at the ceiling, searching for words. "About how hard it is to protect someone. How no matter what you do, life finds a way to hurt them anyway." "You're talking about Lily." "I'm talking about all of it." He turned to look at her, really look. "When Meredith died, I made myself a promise. I would build a life so safe, so controlled, that nothing could ever hurt Lily like that again. No chaos, no risk, no surprises. And then I came along. And then you came along." He smiled, but it was tinged with something sadder. "You're the biggest surprise of my life, Rachel, and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone while also being afraid of losing them. I've been operating on survival mode for so long that I forgot what it feels like to actually want something." Rachel set down her wine glass and shifted closer, her hand finding his. "You don't have to know how. None of us do. We just figure it out as we go." "Is that what we're doing? Figuring it out?" "That's what we said, remember? Us. Together." Daniel looked at her, this woman who had somehow broken through every wall he'd built, and felt something shift inside him. Not the fear going away, but something else growing alongside it. Something that felt almost like courage. "I love you," he said. It came easier now, those words. Less like a confession and more like a fact. "I love you too." Rachel squeezed his hand. "And I'm not going anywhere, no matter how scared you get." They sat in silence for a while, the house settling around them, the weight of the conversation giving way to something lighter. And when Rachel finally left that night, kissing him at the door with a gentleness that made his chest ache, Daniel realized that maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time to actually live. December turned to January, and with the new year came change. It started with a meeting Daniel wasn't supposed to be in. Monroe Creative had been chasing a major account for months. Harrington Industries, a tech company looking to rebrand after a series of PR disasters. The pitch was scheduled for February, and everyone knew that landing Harrington could transform the agency from mid-tier to major player. Rachel had been leading the project personally, hand-selecting a team of senior designers and strategists. Daniel wasn't on that list. He was good at his job, but not exceptional. Not the kind of name that got attached to career-defining projects. Or so he thought. "I want you in the room." Rachel said it casually, like she was asking him to grab coffee, but Daniel knew better. Nothing Rachel did was casual. For the Harrington pitch? For the Harrington pitch. "Rachel, that's not my level. You've got Michael and Sandra and the entire creative leadership team. Why would you need me?" "Because you see things differently." She was looking at him with that sharp, assessing gaze she usually reserved for clients. "The rest of the team thinks in trends. You think in people. And Harrington doesn't need another flashy campaign. They need to rebuild trust. And you think I can help with that?" "I think you're the only one who can." Daniel felt something flutter in his chest, pride, fear, the terrifying weight of expectation. "People will talk. They'll say you put me on the project because we're together." "People already talk." Rachel's voice was firm. "Let them. I don't make business decisions based on personal relationships, and anyone who knows me knows that. You earned this spot, Daniel. I'm just the one smart enough to see it." He wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons this was a bad idea, all the ways it could backfire. But Rachel was looking at him like she believed in him, really believed, and something in Daniel's chest shifted. "Okay," he said. "I'm in." "Good." She smiled, quick and sharp. "First strategy meeting is tomorrow at 8. Don't be late." The next 6 weeks were the hardest of Daniel's professional life. The Harrington project consumed everything. Late nights at the office, Early mornings at his kitchen table, sketching concepts while Lily ate breakfast. Weekends spent reviewing feedback, revising designs, questioning every decision he'd ever made. The pressure was unlike anything he'd experienced. Every meeting felt like a test. Every critique felt like a verdict on his worth. And underneath it all, the whispers continued. Colleagues who wondered aloud why Daniel Brooks, of all people, had been chosen for the agency's most important project in years. "Must be nice to have an in with the boss," someone muttered in the break room one afternoon, loud enough to be heard. Daniel pretended he hadn't heard, kept his head down, kept working. But the words left marks. They always did. Lily noticed the change. She was too young to understand the specifics, but she felt the tension, the shorter bedtime stories, the distracted breakfasts, the way Daniel's phone never seemed to stop buzzing. "Daddy, you're tired," she said one night, studying him with those too perceptive eyes. "Your face looks heavy." "My face looks heavy?" "Like you're carrying something invisible, something big." Daniel pulled her close, marveling as always at her ability to see right through him. "I'm working on a big project at work. It's taking a lot of energy." "Is it scary?" "A little bit, yeah. But you're brave." She said it with absolute certainty. "You're the bravest person I know." "How do you figure that?" "Because you take care of me all by yourself. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. She says it takes a very brave person to do what you do." Daniel's throat tightened. He thought about all the nights he'd felt anything but brave, lonely, scared, overwhelmed. All the moments he'd questioned whether he was doing enough, being enough. "Thank you, baby," he managed. "That means a lot." "You'll figure it out," Lily said, patting his arm with the confidence of someone who had never doubted him. "You always do." Daniel held on to those words through the weeks that followed. When the revisions piled up and the deadlines loomed, when the other designers looked at him with skepticism and the whispers got louder, he remembered his daughter's faith. "You're the bravest person I know." He had to live up to that. He had to try. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the pitch. Daniel was alone in his apartment, Lily asleep in her room, surrounded by crumpled sketches and empty coffee cups. He'd been working on the same concept for days, a visual identity for Harrington that was supposed to capture renewed trust and human connection, and nothing was working. Everything he created felt hollow, corporate, safe in the worst way. And then, in a moment of frustration, he threw out everything he'd been doing and started from scratch. He thought about trust, what it actually meant, not in marketing speak, but in real life. He thought about Meredith and the promises they'd made to each other and how death had broken them anyway. He thought about Lily and the fragile hope in her eyes when she asked about her mother. He thought about Rachel and the terrifying leap of faith it had taken to let her in. Trust wasn't a logo. It wasn't a slogan or a color palette or a clever tagline. Trust was showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. Trust was consistency, reliability, the accumulated weight of 1,000 small moments. Daniel started sketching again, and this time, something clicked. The concept wasn't flashy, it wasn't trendy, it was instead deeply human, a visual language built around the idea of connection, of hands reaching across divides, of light breaking through darkness. The imagery was warm where tech usually ran cold, personal, where corporations usually felt distant. By the time the sun rose, Daniel had something. Not finished, not even close, but something real. Something that felt true. He showed it to Rachel that morning, nervous in a way he hadn't been since their first dinner. She was quiet for a long time, studying the sketches with that intense focus she brought to everything. Daniel's stomach churned. This was either the best work he'd ever done or the worst, and he genuinely couldn't tell which. "Daniel," Rachel said finally, "this is extraordinary. You think so?" "I think this is exactly what Harrington needs." She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes, pride, wonder, something that looked almost like awe. "How did you come up with this?" "I stopped trying to think like a designer," he admitted, "and started thinking like a person who's been hurt and wants to believe in something again." Rachel set down the sketches and stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. She took his hands in hers, holding tight. "You're remarkable," she said. "Do you know that? You hide it behind all your self-doubt and your routine and your 5:30 departures, but you're absolutely remarkable. Daniel felt heat rise to his face. Don't. Rachel's voice was firm. Don't diminish this. You created something beautiful, something true. Own it. He wanted to argue. Old habits died hard. But Rachel was looking at him like he was something worth seeing, and for once, Daniel let himself believe it. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank me after we land the account. She squeezed his hands and stepped back, all business again. Now, let's get to work. We have 3 weeks to turn this concept into a presentation. The final push was brutal. The team worked around the clock, refining Daniel's concept into a comprehensive brand strategy. There were arguments about colors, about messaging, about whether the approach was too soft for a tech company. But Rachel backed Daniel at every turn, defending his vision with the same fierce certainty she brought to everything. Daniel found himself staying later than he ever had, Mrs. Patterson keeping Lily overnight more often than he liked. The guilt was constant, a low hum beneath everything, reminding him of what he was sacrificing. But Lily seemed to understand in her own way. You're fighting for something important, she said one morning when he dropped her off at school, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I can tell. How can you tell? Because you have your serious face, the one you make when something really matters. Does it bother you that I've been so busy? Lily thought about it, her small face scrunched in concentration. A little. I miss our dragon stories. But Mrs. Patterson lets me stay up late, and her cat is very soft. She paused, then added with devastating sincerity, and I'm proud of you, Daddy. Daniel's heart cracked open. You're proud of me? Miss Penny says we should be proud of people who work hard for things they believe in, and you work harder than anyone. He knelt down, right there in the school parking lot, and pulled her into a hug. I love you so much, Lily Brooks. I love you more. She squirmed free, already distracted by something behind him. There's Emma. I have to go tell her about Sparkle's new adventure. She was gone before he could respond, running toward the yellow doors with the carefree abandon of childhood. Daniel watched her go, feeling the familiar ache of love and fear that came with fatherhood. For her. He was doing all of this for her. To show her that hard work mattered, that dreams were worth chasing, that her father wasn't just someone who survived, but someone who strived. The pitch day arrived with a cold February morning and a sky the color of steel. Daniel barely slept the night before. He lay in bed, running through the presentation in his mind, imagining every possible question, every potential criticism. Rachel texted him at midnight. Get some rest. You've done everything you can. He tried. He really did. The Harrington team arrived at 10, a group of executives in expensive suits, their faces carefully neutral. Daniel recognized the CEO from photos, James Harrington himself, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that filled a room. Rachel opened the presentation with confidence, walking them through the agency's credentials, the research they'd conducted, the strategy they were proposing. And then she turned the floor over to Daniel. For the creative vision, she said, I want you to hear from the person who developed it. Daniel Brooks, our senior designer in the heart of this project. Daniel stood. His hands were steady, but inside everything was shaking. He thought about all the people who had doubted him, the colleagues who whispered, the father-in-law who questioned his worth, the voice in his own head that said he wasn't enough. And then he thought about Lily. Trust, he began, isn't something you can manufacture. It's not a campaign or a rebrand or a clever piece of marketing. Trust is built through action, through showing up day after day and proving that you mean what you say. He clicked to the first slide, the warm, human imagery he had developed in those late-night hours alone. Harrington Industries has had a difficult year. You've faced criticism, scrutiny, a loss of faith from your customers and your community. The instinct in situations like this is to pivot, to reinvent, to become something new. He paused, letting the words land. But I don't think that's what you need. I think you need to remember who you were before everything went wrong. The company that was built on innovation and integrity. The company that people believed in. He clicked through the rest of the presentation, walking them through the visual language, the messaging, the strategic rollout. But the heart of it, the thing that made it different, was the humanity. The acknowledgement that trust was earned, not declared, that rebuilding meant humility, patience, and the willingness to do the work. When he finished, the room was silent. James Harrington leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Brooks, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why did you take this approach? Most agencies would have given us something flashy, something that buried the past rather than confronting it." Daniel thought about the question, about what he wanted to say versus what he was afraid to admit. "Because I've had to rebuild trust," he said finally. "In my own life. I know what it's like to lose something important and have to earn it back. And I know that shortcuts don't work. The only thing that works is showing up, again and again, until people believe you mean it." Harrington studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Rachel. "Miss Monroe, your designer has more insight than your entire strategy team." "I'm aware," Rachel said, and there was something like pride in her voice. "We'll take it." Harrington stood, extending his hand to Daniel. "The account is yours, but I want Mr. Brooks on the team, personally." Daniel shook his hand, feeling like he was dreaming. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. The hard work is just beginning." Harrington smiled, the first genuine expression he'd shown all morning. "But I have a feeling you're up for it." The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulations and champagne and colleagues who suddenly seemed to have forgotten all their skepticism. Daniel accepted the praise with grace, but inside he felt strangely calm. He'd done it. Against all odds, against all expectations, he'd proven himself. But the person he most wanted to tell was waiting at home. Mrs. Patterson was reading to Lily when Daniel arrived, later than he'd hoped, but earlier than he'd feared. Lily looked up from her book, saw his face, and immediately knew. "You won." "How can you tell?" "Your face is sunny again." She scrambled off the couch and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms with the full-body commitment of childhood. "I knew you would win. I told Sparkle you would, and she believed me." Daniel lifted her, spinning her once before setting her down. "I couldn't have done it without you, you know." "Me? I didn't do anything." "You believed in me." He knelt down, meeting her eyes. "When I was scared and tired and ready to give up, you believed in me. That's everything, Lily. That's the whole world." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. "Then I guess we make a good team." The best team. Later that night, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, Daniel sat on his couch and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. A year ago, he'd been invisible. A man who did his job and went home, who asked for nothing and expected less. A survivor, not a striver. And now here he was. A designer whose work had just landed the biggest account in his agency's history. A father whose daughter looked at him with pride. A man who was learning, slowly, to believe in himself. His phone buzzed. Rachel. "Still celebrating?" Daniel. "Just got home. Lily's asleep." Rachel. "How does it feel?" He thought about the question, about all the words he could use: proud, relieved, grateful, terrified. Daniel. "It feels like a beginning." Rachel. "It is. This changes everything for you. You know that, right?" Daniel. "I'm starting to." Rachel. "I'm so proud of you, the way you stood up there, the way you spoke about trust and showing up. That wasn't just marketing. That was you." Daniel. "I've had a good teacher." Rachel. "Flattery will get you everywhere." Daniel. "I know." He set the phone down and walked to Lily's room, standing in the doorway the way he'd done 1,000 times before. She was asleep with sparkle and glitter on either side of her, the fairy lights casting soft shadows on the walls. 43 books on the shelf, one sock mysteriously missing, as always. His daughter. His whole world. Daniel thought about all the nights he'd stood in this exact spot, overwhelmed by the weight of single fatherhood. All the times he'd wondered if he was doing enough, being enough. All the fears that kept him small and safe and invisible. And then he thought about tonight. About standing in a room full of executives and speaking his truth. About creating something that mattered. About proving, to himself more than anyone, that he was capable of more than just survival. Lily was right. They made a good team. The news of the Harrington account spread through Monroe Creative like wildfire. By the end of the week, everyone knew Daniel's name, not as Rachel's boyfriend, but as the designer who'd cracked the biggest pitch of the year. The whispers changed. Where once they'd speculated about favoritism, now they buzzed with curiosity. Who was Daniel Brooks, really? Where had he come from? How had someone so quiet, so unassuming, produced work that brilliant? Daniel didn't know how to handle the attention. He'd spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, and now suddenly everyone wanted to talk to him. Colleagues stopped by his desk with questions. Executives nodded at him in the hallway. Even Thomas Monroe, sent him a message. Heard about Harrington. Well done. 4 words, from a man who measured compliments like gold coins. Daniel stared at the message for a full minute before responding. Thank you, sir. Thomas. Don't call me sir, makes me feel old. Daniel. What should I call you? Thomas. Thomas will do. For now. For now. It wasn't an embrace, but it wasn't a dismissal either. It was in Thomas Monroe's particular language an opening. Progress, Daniel thought. Slow, grudging progress. But the biggest change was internal. Something had shifted inside Daniel during that pitch. Something he was only beginning to understand. For years, he'd defined himself by his limitations. The things he couldn't do, couldn't be, couldn't risk. He was a single father, which meant he couldn't work late. He was a widower, which meant he couldn't fall in love. He was ordinary, which meant he couldn't dream big. But none of that was true. None of it had ever been true. He just believed it so long he'd forgotten to question it. Now, for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to want things. Not just stability and survival, but more. A bigger career, a deeper relationship. A life that wasn't just safe, but full. Rachel saw the change in him. They all did. You're different, Marcus said one morning, studying Daniel with an expression somewhere between admiration and suspicion. And I'm not just talking about the Harrington thing. You're like, standing taller. Did you start working out or something? I've always been this height. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. Seriously, man, what happened to you? Daniel thought about the question, about the dinner that started everything, and the relationship that grew from it, and the daughter who believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. I stopped being afraid, he said finally. Of what? Of being seen. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting such a genuine answer. Then he grinned, slapping Daniel on the shoulder. Well, whatever it is, keep doing it. This version of you is way more interesting. He rolled away, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. Being seen. That was it, really. For years, he'd hidden, behind routine, behind obligation, behind the convenient excuse of single fatherhood. And now, bit by bit, he was stepping out of the shadows. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was exactly what he needed. The weeks after the pitch brought new challenges, but Daniel faced them differently than he would have before. There were long hours on the Harrington project, the actual work of implementing the brand strategy he'd created. There were meetings with executives, presentations to stakeholders, moments when the old fear tried to creep back in. But Daniel kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept proving, day after day, that he belonged in the room. Lily adjusted to the new rhythm with her usual resilience. She seemed to understand, on some intuitive level, that her father was building something important. She asked questions about his work. What does branding mean, Daddy? Why do companies need logos? Can I design one? And Daniel answered them with patience and honesty. One night she presented him with a drawing, a picture of a dragon surrounded by stars, with the words, Daddy's Company, written in wobbly letters at the top. For your office, she said proudly, so you can think of me when you're working. Daniel hung it above his desk the next day. It was the first personal item he'd ever displayed at work. Marcus noticed immediately. Is that a dragon? It's my company logo, designed by my daughter. Your daughter? Marcus studied the drawing with exaggerated seriousness. You know what? It's better than half the stuff we produce here. Kid's got talent. Daniel smiled. She knows. The relationship with Rachel deepened too, in ways that surprised them both. They'd started this thing as a lie, a fake relationship constructed to satisfy demanding parents. But somewhere along the way, the fake had become real. More than real. It had become essential. Rachel started spending weekends at Daniel's place, fitting herself into the rhythms of his life with Lily. She learned which pancake shapes were acceptable, dragons, always dragons, and which bedtime stories were favorites, anything with magic and happy endings. She helped with homework. Lily was learning to read now, sounding out words with fierce concentration, and cheered at soccer games, even though Lily spent most of the time picking dandelions instead of chasing the ball. "You're good at this," Daniel said one Sunday afternoon, watching Rachel and Lily build an elaborate pillow fort in the living room. Rachel looked up, a throw blanket half draped over her head. "Good at what?" "This. Being here. Being part of things." Something soft passed across her face. "I like being part of things. Your things, specifically. Even the dragon drawings in the early mornings? Especially those." She smiled, and there was nothing guarded about it. "I never thought I wanted this, you know. Kids, domesticity, all of it. I thought my life was complete with just work, but then you came along with your pancakes and your integrity speeches, and suddenly what? Suddenly I wanted more." She held his gaze, steady and certain. "You made me want more, Daniel. That's not nothing." He crossed the room and kissed her, right there in the middle of the pillow. Fort construction, while Lily made exaggerated gagging noises in the background. "Gross," she declared. "No kissing in the fort. It's a rule." "Whose rule?" Daniel asked. "Mine. I'm the Dragon Queen. I make the rules." Rachel laughed. "Can't argue with that logic." And Daniel, surrounded by blankets and pillows, and the two people he loved most in the world, felt something settle inside him. Peace. Belonging. The quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. But peace, he was learning, was never permanent. The call came on a Tuesday evening when Daniel was helping Lily with her reading practice. "Dat," she sounded out carefully, pointing at the word in her book. "The cat sat on the mat." "Daddy, why do cats sit on mats?" "Because mats are comfortable, I guess." "But Muffin sits on Mrs. Patterson's head sometimes. That doesn't seem comfortable." "Muffin is a special cat." Daniel's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number, and almost let it go to voicemail. But something made him answer. "Is this Daniel Brooks?" "Speaking." "Mr. Brooks, my name is Caroline Weber. I'm a senior recruiter at Vanguard Design Group. Do you have a moment?" Daniel's heart stuttered. Vanguard was one of the top design firms in the country, maybe the top firm, depending on who you asked. They worked with Fortune 500 companies, had offices in 3 continents, and were legendary for their selectivity. Yes, I have a moment." "Wonderful. Mr. Brooks, I'll get straight to the point. We've been following your work on the Harrington project, and we're impressed, very impressed. We'd like to discuss a potential opportunity with you." "An opportunity?" "A position. Director of Brand Strategy based here in the city. It's a significant step up from your current role, and it comes with compensation to match." She named a number. Daniel had to ask her to repeat it. It was more than double his current salary. "I know this is sudden," Caroline continued, "but we believe in moving quickly when we identify talent. Would you be available for a meeting this week?" Daniel looked at Lily, who was watching him with curious eyes. He thought about Rachel and the life they were building and everything he'd worked for at Monroe Creative. "Can I have some time to think about it?" "Of course. I'll send you the details via email. Take a few days. But Mr. Brooks, I wouldn't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." She hung up, and Daniel sat there, phone in hand, trying to process what had just happened. "Who was that, Daddy?" "Just someone from work," he said automatically. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was the kind of opportunity he'd never dared to dream about. Director of Brand Strategy at Vanguard. The career leap that could change everything, for him, for Lily, for their future. And all he had to do was say yes. So why did it feel like a trap? Daniel didn't tell Rachel about the call, not right away. He told himself he needed time to think, to process, to figure out what he actually wanted before complicating things with outside opinions. But the truth was messier than that. The truth was, he was afraid. Afraid of what the offer meant. Afraid of what he might have to give up. Afraid that saying yes would destroy the fragile balance he'd spent years building. The Vanguard information arrived in his inbox the next morning. He read through it 3 times, absorbing the details. The position was everything a career-minded person could want: prestige, influence, a salary that could send Lily to any college she dreamed of. But the expectations were clear too. Vanguard demanded excellence, and excellence came at a cost. Long hours, international travel, a commitment to the work that left little room for anything else. Daniel thought about Rachel's father and all those questions about what he could offer, about stability and ambition and proving his worth. This was his chance to prove it, to become someone even Thomas Monroe couldn't dismiss. But at what cost? He spent the next few days in a fog, going through the motions of work and parenting while his mind churned endlessly. Rachel noticed something was wrong, of course she did, but he deflected her questions with vague assurances. "Just tired," he said. "Lot on my mind." "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet. Soon." She let it go, trusting him to come to her when he was ready. That trust felt like a weight. The week passed. Then another. Caroline Weber sent a follow-up email, politely inquiring about his interest. Daniel stared at it for an hour before closing his laptop without responding. He was running out of time, running out of excuses, running out of ways to avoid the decision that would shape everything. And then Lily, in her infinite 4-year-old wisdom, forced his hand. "Daddy," she said one morning, studying him over her cereal. "Are you happy?" The question stopped him cold. "What do you mean?" "You've been making your thinking face a lot, the one where your eyebrows scrunch up, and you haven't been singing in the morning like you used to." Daniel hadn't realized he'd stopped singing, hadn't realized she'd noticed. "I'm okay, baby, just working through some grown-up stuff." "What kind of stuff?" He hesitated. "How did you explain career decisions and life choices to a 4-year-old? How did you admit that you were paralyzed by an opportunity most people would grab without hesitation?" "Someone offered me a new job," he said finally. "A really good one. But it would mean some changes." "What kind of changes?" "Working more. Maybe traveling. Being away from home a lot." Lily's face grew serious. "Away from me?" "Sometimes. Not forever, but more than now." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. Then she looked up at him, her eyes, Meredith's eyes, searching his face. "Would it make you happy, the new job?" Daniel opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Would it make him happy? He'd been so focused on what the job offered, money, prestige, validation, that he hadn't actually asked himself that question. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then why would you do it?" The simplicity of the question cut through all his tangled reasoning. Why would you do it? If it didn't make him happy, if it meant sacrificing the things that actually mattered, then why? "That's a really good question, Lily." "I know." She returned to her cereal, satisfied. "I'm very smart." That night, Daniel finally told Rachel. They were sitting on his couch, the way they always did, with glasses of wine neither of them was drinking. Lily was asleep, and the house was quiet, and Daniel couldn't carry the secret anymore. "I got a job offer," he said, 2 weeks ago. Rachel went very still. "A job offer?" "From Vanguard Design Group, Director of Brand Strategy. They saw my work on Harrington and reached out." Silence. Then, "That's incredible, Daniel. Vanguard is, I know what they are." He set down his wine glass, turning to face her fully. "I know what the opportunity means. I've been running the numbers in my head for 2 weeks. The salary, the prestige, the career trajectory. It's everything I'm supposed to want." But it would mean long hours, travel, being a different kind of father than I've been." He paused, searching for the right words. "When I became a dad, I made a choice. I chose presence over ambition. I chose being there for Lily over climbing ladders. And I don't regret that choice, Rachel. Not for a second." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know if I can take this job. I don't know if I can be the kind of person it requires and still be the kind of father I want to be." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. Have you talked to them? About flexibility? Places like Vanguard don't do flexibility. They do excellence, and excellence means all in. Then what do you want to do? Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. I want someone to tell me the right answer. I want to guarantee that whatever I choose, it won't blow up in my face. Daniel. Rachel took his hand, her grip warm and steady. There are no guarantees, there never are. All you can do is make the choice you can live with. And if I choose wrong? Then you adjust, you adapt, you figure it out. She squeezed his hand. That's what you do, remember? You show up again and again until it works out. Daniel looked at her, this woman who had somehow become his partner in everything, and felt something loosen in his chest. She wasn't going to tell him what to do. She wasn't going to pressure him one way or the other. She was just there, steady and certain, trusting him to find his own answer. What if staying means I'm choosing fear? He asked quietly. What if I'm using Lily as an excuse to avoid taking risks? Do you believe that? He thought about the question, really thought. No, he said finally. I don't. I think I'm choosing her, choosing the life we've built, choosing presence over prestige. Then that's your answer. Is it that simple? It's exactly that simple. Rachel smiled, soft and certain. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. You are? I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to influence you, but yes, Daniel, I'm glad. I like our life. I like who you are in it, and I don't want that to change. Daniel pulled her close, holding on tight. He thought about the offer sitting in his inbox, the salary, the prestige, the validation, all the things he'd once believed would make him worthy. And then he thought about this, Rachel in his arms, Lily asleep in her room, the small, imperfect life they were building together. There was no contest. I'm going to turn it down, he said. Tomorrow. Are you sure? I'm sure. He pulled back, meeting her eyes. This is what I want. You, Lily, the life we're building. Everything else is just noise. Rachel kissed him then, soft and slow and full of promise, and Daniel felt the last of his doubt dissolve. He knew who he was now. He knew what mattered. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. The morning after his conversation with Rachel, Daniel woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. The decision was made. The path was chosen. All that remained was the execution. He dropped Lily at school with an extra-long hug, lingering at the yellow doors until she waved him away with cheerful impatience. Then he drove to work, parked in his usual spot, and sat in his car for a full 10 minutes, gathering his thoughts. The email to Caroline Weber was short, professional, final. Thank you for the opportunity. After careful consideration, I've decided to decline. I'm committed to my current path and the life I'm building here. I wish Vanguard continued success. He read it 3 times, changed a word, changed it back. Then, before he could second-guess himself, pressed send. The response came faster than expected. A gracious acknowledgement, a door left open for the future, well wishes for his career. No hard feelings, no pressure, just the quiet close of a chapter that had never really begun. Daniel stared at his phone for a long moment, waiting for the regret to hit. The what-ifs. The self-doubt that had plagued him for years. It didn't come. Instead, there was only peace. The bone-deep certainty that he'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the prestigious choice, but the right one. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. How do you feel? He typed back. Free. The weeks that followed proved him right. Work continued at its familiar pace, but something had shifted in Daniel's relationship with it. He no longer felt like he was just surviving, grinding through days to reach some distant finish line. He was building something. The Harrington project flourished under his guidance, and the success opened doors he hadn't expected, not to bigger firms or grander titles, but to more meaningful work. Clients started asking for him by name. Colleagues sought his input on their projects. Even the people who had whispered about favoritism began to acknowledge, grudgingly, that Daniel Brooks had earned his place. You're becoming a person around here, Marcus observed one afternoon, rolling his chair over with characteristic subtlety. I'm not sure how I feel about it. A person? Yeah, someone with a reputation, opinions, influence. Marcus grinned. It's unsettling. I liked it better when you were invisible. Sorry to disappoint. Oh, I'm not disappointed, just adjusting. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Between us? I'm proud of you, man. The whole Harrington thing, turning down Vanguard. Yeah, I heard about that. Office gossip is brutal. Sticking with what matters. Takes guts. Daniel hadn't realized the Vanguard offer had become public knowledge. He probably should have expected it. Nothing stayed secret in a place like this. But somehow, knowing that people knew and respected his choice made it feel even more real. Thanks, Marcus. That actually means a lot. Don't get emotional on me. I have a reputation to maintain. Marcus rolled back to his desk, already distracted by something on his screen. Hey, you want to grab drinks later? Celebrate your continued existence as a regular person? Can't. Lily has a school thing tonight. Of course she does. But Marcus was smiling. Rain check then. Don't become too important to drink with the common folk. I'll try. Lily's school thing turned out to be a small performance. The preschool's spring showcase featuring songs about seasons and a dance number involving scarves and a lot of confusion about stage directions. Daniel sat in the audience with Rachel beside him, watching his daughter wave a purple scarf with total commitment and zero coordination. She's really going for it, Rachel whispered. She doesn't know any other way. Wonder where she gets that from. Daniel smiled, but his eyes never left the stage. Lily was singing now, her small voice lost in the chorus of other children, her face scrunched with concentration. She caught his eye and waved, breaking character entirely, and Daniel waved back without caring who saw. This was it. This was what he'd chosen. Not the corner office or the six-figure salary, but this, a plastic chair in a preschool auditorium, watching his daughter massacre a choreographed routine, feeling like the richest man in the world. After the show, Lily ran to him with the urgency of a child who had important news to share. Daddy, did you see? I did the twirl, the one we practiced. I saw. You were amazing. Miss Penny said I was enthusiastic. That means good, right? It means very good. Lily beamed, then turned to Rachel with expectant eyes. Did you see too? I saw everything. Rachel knelt down to Lily's level. You were the best scarf waver up there. I practiced a lot. Sparkle helped me. Did she? She's very good at dancing. Dragons have lots of legs so they can do more moves. Rachel glanced at Daniel, her lips twitching. That's very logical. I know. Lily took both their hands, positioning herself between them. Can we get ice cream to celebrate my enthusiasticness? Daniel looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Daniel. Some decisions didn't require discussion. Ice cream it is, Daniel said. They walked to the car together, Lily swinging between them, chattering about the performance and her classmates and the boy named Tyler, who had forgotten all his words and just stood there looking confused. Rachel laughed at the right moments, asked follow-up questions, engaged with the story like it was the most important thing she'd heard all day. Daniel watched them together and felt his heart expand. This was his family now. Not just him and Lily against the world, but something bigger, something better. And he almost hadn't let it happen. The thought struck him sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and he had too much space to think. How close he'd come to pushing Rachel away. How many times he'd almost let fear win. How different his life would be if he'd never walked into that candlelit dinner, never played along with a lie that turned into truth. Meredith would have liked Rachel. He was certain of it. They were different in almost every way. Meredith soft where Rachel was sharp, quiet where Rachel was commanding, but they shared something essential, a capacity for love that didn't demand perfection, a strength that made space for weakness. He thought about Meredith less often now, not because he'd forgotten her, but because the grief had transformed. It wasn't the crushing weight it had once been, the thing that threatened to pull him under every time he let his guard down. It was gentler now, a presence rather than an absence. The knowledge that she had existed, that they had loved each other, that Lily was the living proof of something beautiful. He still talked about her. To Lily, mostly, but sometimes to Rachel, too. The stories came easier now, without the sharp edges they'd once carried. She hated mornings, he told Rachel one night, when they were lying in bed and the conversation had drifted to memories. would hit the snooze button 5 times, minimum. I used to hide the alarm clock on the other side of the room to force her out of bed. Did it work? Once. She threw a pillow at me and went back to sleep anyway. Rachel laughed, a soft sound in the darkness. I like hearing about her. You do? She's part of your story. Part of Lily's story. Pretending she didn't exist would be weird. She shifted closer, her head finding his shoulder. I'm not threatened by her, Daniel. I never was. Some people would be. Some people aren't me. She pressed a kiss to his collarbone. I know you loved her. I know part of you always will. That doesn't diminish what we have. If anything, it makes me trust you more. How do you figure? Because I know you don't give your heart easily. You don't fall into things. When you commit, you mean it. She tilted her head up to meet his eyes. And you've committed to me. I have. Then I have nothing to worry about. Daniel pulled her closer, marveling at how simple she made it sound. How clear. He'd spent years tying himself in knots over questions of loyalty and love, wondering if moving forward meant betraying what he'd had before. And Rachel had cut through all of it with a few sentences. He was allowed to love again. He was allowed to be happy. The one didn't erase the other. It was somehow the permission he hadn't known he needed. Spring turned to summer, and summer brought changes. Rachel received a promotion, executive vice president, a title that came with more responsibility, more pressure, and more time in the corner office. She took it without hesitation, and Daniel supported her without reservation. They were a team now, in the truest sense. Her victories were his, and his were hers. Lily turned 5. The birthday party was held in Daniel's small backyard, featuring a dragon-themed cake that Rachel had commissioned from a specialty bakery and decorations that Lily had insisted on helping to choose. Mrs. Patterson came, and Marcus showed up with an absurdly oversized stuffed animal, and even Thomas and Catherine made the trip. Daniel watched Thomas watching Lily, the way the older man's face softened when she laughed, the way he actually got down on one knee to examine her collection of dragon figurines, and felt something shift between them. Later, when the cake was eaten and the presents were opened and Lily was showing off her new toys to anyone who would listen, Thomas found Daniel standing alone by the refreshment table. You've built something here, Thomas said without preamble. Daniel turned, surprised. I'm sorry? This. Thomas gestured vaguely at the party, at the house, at everything. A year ago, I wasn't sure you were capable of it. Wasn't sure you had the fortitude. And now? Thomas was quiet for a moment, watching Lily chase Marcus across the lawn with a foam sword. Then he turned to meet Daniel's eyes. Now I think I may have misjudged you. The words came slowly, like they cost him something to say. You're not what I expected, but perhaps that's not a bad thing. Daniel didn't know how to respond. This was, he realized, the closest Thomas Monroe had ever come to an apology. I love your daughter, Daniel said finally. I love my daughter. That's really all I know how to do, show up for the people I love. And you think that's enough? I think it's everything. Thomas considered this. Then slowly he extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Daniel. The handshake was firm, decisive, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Daniel felt the weight of it, the significance. Thomas Monroe's approval shouldn't have mattered this much. But it did. It meant that Rachel's father saw him now, really saw him, not as a threat or a distraction, but as someone worthy, someone good enough. Catherine was crying when they rejoined the party. I saw the whole thing, she whispered, pulling Daniel into a hug. He never does that. Never. Does what? Admits he was wrong, gives people second chances. She pulled back, cupping his face the way she had at that very first dinner. You're good for her, Daniel. Good for all of us. Daniel didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded, feeling something crack open in his chest. Not pain, but release. The final letting go of all the judgment he'd carried, all the fear of not being enough. He was enough. He'd always been enough. It had just taken him this long to believe it. The summer months passed in a haze of warmth and contentment. There were weekend trips to the beach, where Lily built sandcastles and Rachel pretended not to mind getting sand in her designer sunglasses. There were lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes, still dragon-shaped, always dragon-shaped, and evenings on the small porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dark. Daniel's career continued to evolve. The Harrington Project led to others, each one a little bigger, a little more complex. He developed a reputation for work that was both beautiful and true, designs that didn't just sell products but told stories, built connections, made people feel something. He never regretted turning down Vanguard. Not once. Every time he left work at 5:30 to pick up Lily, every time he sat in the audience at a school performance, every time he tucked his daughter into bed with a story about dragons and bravery and love, he knew he'd made the right choice. Rachel thrived in her new role. The executive vice president title suited her, brought out a confidence that had always been there but now had room to bloom. She was brilliant and demanding and exactly what Monroe Creative needed, and Daniel watched her success with nothing but pride. Their relationship deepened in ways he hadn't anticipated. It was past the early rush of discovery now, settling into something steadier, more sustainable. They argued sometimes, about work, about parenting decisions, about who forgot to buy milk again. But the arguments never threatened what they'd built. They were just part of the texture of life together. "I've never had this before," Rachel told him one night, as they lay tangled together in the dark. "This ease. I always thought relationships were supposed to be hard. Constant negotiation, constant compromise. But with you, it just flows. It's not always easy." "No, but it's not a struggle either. Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense. Daniel had spent years bracing for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the moment when happiness would reveal itself as temporary, conditional, something that could be taken away. But it hadn't dropped. The shoe stayed where it was, and life kept getting better. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that good things didn't last, but that expecting them to end was a way of ending them yourself. A self-fulfilling prophecy disguised as protection. Daniel was done protecting himself from joy. Fall arrived with cooler air and the promise of change. Lily started kindergarten, a milestone that felt both impossible and inevitable. Daniel walked her to her classroom on the first day, holding her hand tight, feeling like his heart might crack in half. "You okay, Daddy?" "I'm okay, baby. Just proud of you." "You're making the crying face." "I'm not crying. Your eyes are shiny." "That's just allergies." Lily patted his hand with the patient condescension of a 5-year-old who knew better. "It's okay to be sad. Miss Penny says emotions are healthy." "Miss Penny is very wise." "I know. That's why she's a teacher." They reached her classroom and Daniel knelt down to meet her eyes. "You're going to be amazing. You know that, right?" "I know." She said it with absolute certainty, no trace of doubt. "I'm going to make friends and learn things and have adventures." "That sounds perfect." "Will you miss me?" "Every second of every day." Lily considered this. "But you'll be okay, because you have Rachel now, and she makes you happy." Daniel's throat tightened. His daughter, his 5-year-old daughter, was comforting him, making sure he'd be okay while she wasn't there. "Yeah," he managed. "She does." "Good." Lily kissed his cheek, a quick, sloppy thing. "I'll see you later, Daddy. Don't be too sad." Then she was gone, swallowed by the bright classroom and the chaos of 20 other kindergartners, leaving Daniel standing in the hallway with shiny eyes and a full heart. He made it to his car before the tears actually fell. The fall brought other changes too. Rachel started talking about the future in concrete terms, not vague some days, but specific plans. A bigger place to live, more room for Lily, a life that made space for all of them together. "What do you think about moving in together?" she asked one evening, casual but not casual, her eyes watching his reaction carefully. Daniel set down his fork, giving the question the weight it deserved. "You mean permanently?" "No, Daniel, I mean temporarily. For a few hours." She rolled her eyes. "Yes, permanently. I'm here most nights anyway. It doesn't make sense to keep paying for 2 places when we're basically living in one." "That's very practical reasoning. I'm a practical person." "You are." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "But is that the only reason?" Rachel's expression softened. "No. I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to argue about whose turn it is to make breakfast. I want Lily to have a room at my place, our place, where all her dragons can live. She paused. I want this to be real, official. Not just something that's happening, but something we've chosen. It's already real. I know, but I want it to be more real. She squeezed his hand. I want the world to know that we're building something, that this isn't temporary. Daniel thought about his small house, the one he'd made a home through sheer determination. The lavender walls in Lily's room, the 43 books, the fairy lights he'd strung himself, learning from YouTube, doing it wrong twice before getting it right. That house had saved him. But maybe it was time for something new. Yes, he said. Rachel blinked. Yes? Let's do it. Let's find a place together. Let's make it official. Just like that? Just like that? He smiled, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. I'm done waiting for permission to be happy, Rachel. I'm done hedging my bets. If we're doing this, let's do it all the way. Rachel was across the table before he could react, kissing him with an intensity that said more than words could. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. I love you, she said. Have I mentioned that lately? Once or twice, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you. She kissed him again. I love you. I love you. I love you too. He caught her face in his hands, holding her gaze. And I'm going to love you tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as you'll let me. That's going to be a very long time. I'm counting on it. Finding the right place took longer than expected. They looked at apartments and condos and townhouses, traipsing through open houses every weekend while Lily offered her unsolicited opinions. Too small. Too big. Not enough windows. No backyard for Sparkle to play in. The dragons, apparently, had very specific requirements. But finally, in late October, they found it. It was a house, a real house, with a yard and a garage and 3 bedrooms, and a kitchen that opened to a living room in a way that made the whole space feel connected. Not as fancy as Rachel's brownstone, not as modest as Daniel's rental. Something in between, something that felt like them. What do you think? The realtor asked, watching their faces carefully. Daniel looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Daniel. Some conversations didn't need words. We'll take it, Rachel said. The move happened in November. A chaotic weekend of boxes and furniture, and Lily running through empty rooms shouting about the acoustics. Mrs. Patterson came to help, as did Marcus and a few colleagues from work. Even Thomas showed up, rolling up his sleeves and carrying boxes with the focused efficiency of a man who didn't believe in standing idle. By Sunday evening, the house was livable. Not unpacked, that would take weeks, but livable. Beds assembled, kitchen functional, Lily's new room already populated with her 43 books, the fairy lights Daniel had carefully transferred from the old house, and every dragon figurine she owned. They stood on the front porch as the sun set, watching the colors bleed across the sky. Lily was asleep inside, exhausted from the excitement. Rachel leaned against Daniel's shoulder, her hand finding his. We did it, she said. We did. Scared? Terrified. He smiled. But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means something important is happening. I know that feeling. They stood in silence for a while, letting the moment settle. Daniel thought about everything that had led to this. The ambush dinner that started it all, the lies that became truth, the choices he'd made, and the ones he'd turned away from. Every step had brought him here, to this porch, with this woman, building a life he never thought he'd have. Rachel? I want to marry you. She went very still beside him. What? I want to marry you. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Not right now, not even soon necessarily, but someday. I want you to know that's where I'm headed, where we're headed. If you want that too. Rachel stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a terrible moment, Daniel thought he'd miscalculated. Gone too fast, pushed too hard, said the one thing that would shatter everything. Then she laughed. Not unkindly, but with something like disbelief. Daniel Brooks, she said, are you proposing to me on our first night in our new house, with no ring, on a half-finished porch, while I'm wearing paint-stained sweatpants? I'm Declaring intent? Declaring intent. She shook her head, but she was smiling. That's the most you think you've ever said. Is that a yes? It's not a no. She stepped closer, her arms sliding around his neck. Ask me properly. When you're ready. When you have a ring. When we've had time to actually live in this house together. And when I ask? Then I'll say yes. She kissed him, soft and certain. I've known for a while now, Daniel. You're it for me. You and Lily. This life. I don't need a proposal to know that. But you want one anyway. A girl likes to feel special. She grinned. Besides, my mother would never forgive me if I got engaged without a proper story to tell. Daniel laughed, the sound startled out of him. Fair point. So, intent declared, response noted. Now let's go inside and see if we can find the box with the wine glasses. I love you, he said as she pulled him toward the door. I know. She glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes bright in the fading light. I love you too. The months that followed were the happiest of Daniel's life. Living together wasn't always easy. There were adjustments, compromises, moments when their different rhythms clashed and sparked. Rachel was a night owl. Daniel was an early riser. She left dishes in the sink. He needed everything in its place. They argued about thermostat settings and whose turn it was to cook and whether 5-year-olds really needed that much screen time. But they figured it out. That was the thing. They always figured it out. Every conflict resolved, every tension eased, every disagreement ending not with a winner and a loser, but with something better. Understanding. Growth. The quiet victory of two people choosing each other, over and over, even when it was hard. Lily flourished in the new house. Her room was bigger than her old one, with space for all her dragons and room to grow. She started calling Rachel by her name instead of Daddy's friend, a shift that happened gradually and then all at once. Rachel helped with homework, attended school events, learned the intricate mythology of sparkle and glitter and the ever-expanding dragon universe. One night, as Daniel was tucking Lily into bed, she grabbed his hand with unusual seriousness. Daddy? Yeah, baby? Is Rachel going to be my mom? The question hung in the air, heavier than anything a 5-year-old should carry. Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed, gathering his thoughts. What makes you ask that? Emily at school has a stepmom. She said that's when your dad marries someone new, and you and Rachel love each other, right? We do. So, are you going to get married? Daniel thought about Rachel on the porch, her arms around his neck, telling him to ask properly when he was ready. He thought about the ring he'd already started looking at, late at night when everyone was asleep. Someday, he said carefully. Yes, we're planning to. Lily nodded slowly, processing. And then Rachel will be my stepmom. Is that okay with you? I think so. She was quiet for a moment. But what about my real mom, the one in heaven? Daniel's heart ached. He reached out, brushing hair from her face. Your real mom will always be your mom. Nothing changes that. Not ever. But love isn't like a pie, Lily. Having more of it doesn't mean less for someone else. You can love Rachel and still love your mom's memory. There's room for both. Promise? Promise. Lily considered this, her small face scrunched in thought. Then she smiled, a bright, uncomplicated thing. Okay, then I think it's good. Rachel makes you happy. And she makes really good hot chocolate. That she does. And she doesn't laugh when I talk about sparkle. She takes it seriously. That's very important. I know. Lily yawned, her eyes already growing heavy. I think Mom would like her. Don't you? Daniel thought about Meredith, her laugh, her warmth, her fierce love for the daughter she'd barely had time to know. Would she like Rachel? Would she approve of this new life Daniel was building? He couldn't know for certain. But somehow, deep in his heart, he felt the answer was yes. I think she would, baby. I really do. Lily smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Daniel sat with her until her breathing evened out, then slipped quietly from the room. Rachel was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with an expression he couldn't quite read. I heard, she said quietly. Some of it. How much? Enough. She stepped closer, her hand finding his. The pie metaphor was nice. I improvised. It showed. But she was smiling. She asked if I was going to be her mom. She asked if you were going to be her stepmom. Same difference. Rachel's voice was soft, wondering. I never thought I'd be a mom, Daniel. Any kind of mom. And now I want it, more than I ever expected. She looked up at him, her eyes bright. Is that crazy? It's only been a year. It's been a year and a half, and no, it's not crazy. He pulled her into his arms, holding tight. It's everything. They stood like that for a long time, in the hallway of their new house, with Lily asleep and the future stretching out before them like a promise. Daniel thought about the man he'd been before all this, the one who survived rather than lived, the one who hid behind routine and obligation, afraid to want anything beyond what he already had. That man was gone now. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but transformed into someone who took risks, someone who chose love over fear, someone who built a life instead of just enduring one. And standing here, with Rachel in his arms and his daughter safe in her bed, Daniel finally understood what he'd been working toward all along. Not just survival, not just stability. Home. Winter settled over the city like a quiet promise, blanketing the streets in white and transforming their new house into something out of a storybook. Lily pressed her face against the window every morning, counting the snowflakes, asking when they could build a snowman. Daniel watched her wonder and felt his heart expand with the familiar ache of fatherhood, that impossible mix of joy and fear that never quite went away. A year had passed since the ambush dinner. A year since Rachel had introduced him to her parents as her boyfriend, since he'd stood in her candlelit dining room and felt his carefully constructed world begin to shift. Looking back now, Daniel could barely recognize the man he'd been then. The one who hid behind routine, who measured success by survival rather than joy, who had forgotten how to want things. That man seemed like a stranger now. Rachel found him one evening standing at the window, watching the snow fall in the light of the street lamps. She came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his shoulder. Deep thoughts? Just thinking about how different things are from a year ago. Different good or different bad? Different everything. He turned to face her, pulling her close. A year ago, I was invisible. I had my routine, my daughter, my safe little life. I thought that was enough. I thought I didn't deserve more. And now? Now I have you, this house, a career I actually care about, a future I can see. He brushed hair from her face, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. I have everything I never let myself want. Rachel smiled, but there was something tentative in it, something she was holding back. Speaking of wanting things, she said carefully, I have something to tell you. Daniel's heart stuttered. In his experience, sentences that began with, I have something to tell you, rarely ended well. Okay. Don't look so terrified. She laughed, but her eyes were serious. It's good news. At least I think it's good news. I hope it's good news. Rachel, I've been offered a position, CEO of Monroe Creative. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Daniel stared at her, processing. CEO? But what about your father? I thought he was... He's stepping back, finally. The board has been pushing for succession planning for months, and he's agreed that it's time. Rachel's voice was steady, but he could see the emotion beneath it. They want me, Daniel. They want me to run the company. Rachel, that's incredible. I know. I still can't quite believe it. She pulled back slightly, searching his face. But it changes things. The hours, the pressure, the expectations. It won't be easy. When has anything worth having ever been easy? I'm serious. This job, it's going to be consuming. There will be late nights, early mornings, travel. I need to know that you're okay with that. That we're okay with that. Daniel thought about all the times he'd worried about being enough. Not successful enough, not ambitious enough, not worthy of Rachel in her world. And here she was, on the brink of the biggest achievement of her career, asking if he was okay. Rachel. He took her face in his hands, making sure she was looking at him. I fell in love with a woman who works harder than anyone I've ever known. A woman who builds empires before breakfast and still comes home to help a 5-year-old with her dragon drawings. Whatever this job demands, we'll figure it out. Together. That's what we do. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She kissed him then, deep and fierce, and Daniel felt the truth of his words settle into his bones. They would figure it out. They always did. The announcement came 2 weeks later at a company-wide meeting that buzzed with anticipation and anxiety. Rachel stood at the front of the room, poised and commanding, and told them what they probably already suspected. Thomas Monroe was stepping down, and she was taking the helm. The applause was immediate and sustained. Daniel clapped with everyone else, but his eyes never left Rachel's face. The confidence there, the readiness. She was born for this. Afterward, when the crowd had dispersed and the congratulations had been delivered, Thomas found Daniel in the hallway outside Rachel's new office. "Well, Thomas said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "She did it." "She did. Congratulations." "The congratulations go to her. I'm just the one who got out of the way." Thomas paused, studying Daniel with that assessing gaze he'd worn since their first meeting. "She'll need support, you know. This job, it takes everything. I've watched it consume people." "I know." "Do you?" "Because being with a CEO isn't like being with a vice president. The demands are different. The sacrifices are different." Daniel met his eyes without flinching. "With respect, sir, Thomas, I've been supporting Rachel since before you approved of me. I didn't need the title to know what she was worth, and I don't need warnings about what this job will require. I'm here. I'm staying. End of story." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Good. That's what I hoped you'd say." He clapped Daniel on the shoulder, an awkward gesture from a man who didn't do physical affection easily. "Take care of her, Daniel. She's stronger than anyone I know, but even strong people need someone in their corner." "I know. I'm in hers." "Yes." Something softened in Thomas's expression, just for a moment. "I believe you are." He walked away without another word, leaving Daniel alone with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Take care of her. He intended to. For the rest of his life. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and filling the air with the promise of new beginnings. Daniel had been planning for months, researching rings, scouting locations, running scenarios in his head until they all blurred together. He wanted the proposal to be perfect, not flashy, not elaborate, but perfect for them, for their story. In the end, he chose simplicity. It was a Saturday afternoon in early April. The cherry blossoms were blooming in the park near their house, turning the walking paths into tunnels of pink and white. Daniel had arranged for Mrs. Patterson to take Lily for the day. A special adventure, he'd told his daughter, who had agreed with suspicious enthusiasm, like she knew exactly what was happening and was simply choosing not to spoil the surprise. Rachel came home from a morning meeting to find Daniel waiting in the kitchen with a picnic basket and a nervous smile. "What's this?" "A date. Remember those? We used to have them before you became the most important person at your company." "I was always the most important person." But she was smiling, already reaching for her jacket. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." They walked to the park hand in hand, Rachel asking questions that Daniel deflected with vague non-answers. The blossoms were at their peak, petals drifting down like snow, and the paths were full of families and couples and dogs chasing shadows. Daniel led her to a bench near the old gazebo, the one where they'd had their first unofficial date, months ago, when everything was new and uncertain. They'd come here to talk, to figure out what they were becoming, to decide if the lie they'd started could transform into something true. It had. Beyond anything either of them had imagined. "Daniel." Rachel sat down beside him, her expression growing serious. "What's going on? You've been acting strange all morning." "Have I?" "You made breakfast without being asked. You ironed a shirt. You've checked your pocket about 15 times since we left the house." She raised an eyebrow. "Something's up." Daniel laughed despite his nerves. Of course she'd noticed. Rachel noticed everything. "Okay," he said. "You're right. Something's up." He reached into his pocket, the pocket he'd been checking compulsively, and pulled out a small velvet box. Rachel's eyes went wide. Daniel, let me say this. He took a breath, steadying himself. A year and a half ago, you invited me to a dinner under false pretenses and introduced me to your parents as your boyfriend. I should have been furious. I should have walked out. Instead, I stayed. Because something about you, about that moment, felt like fate. He opened the box, revealing the ring he'd spent weeks choosing. Simple, elegant, a diamond that caught the light like captured starlight. Rachel Monroe, you turned my life upside down in the best possible way. You pushed me to be better, to want more, to believe I was worth more. You loved my daughter like your own and made our little family into something bigger and stronger. And somewhere along the way, you became the person I can't imagine living without. He slid off the bench, one knee on the grass, the box held out before him. I know this isn't traditional. I know we started with a lie. But everything since then has been the most honest thing I've ever known. So I'm asking you, properly this time, with a ring and everything, will you marry me? Rachel was crying. Daniel had never seen her cry like this. Not pretty, theatrical tears, but the real kind, the ones that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. Yes, she said, her voice cracking. Yes, of course, yes. Did you really think I'd say anything else? I hoped, but I wasn't sure. You impossible man. She pulled him up from the ground and kissed him, hard and certain, while the cherry blossoms fell around them like confetti. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Daniel slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, and Rachel held it up to the light, watching it sparkle. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. Smooth. But she was laughing through her tears. We're really doing this, aren't we? Getting married, becoming a family, the whole thing. The whole thing. Daniel pulled her close, breathing in the scent of cherry blossoms and Rachel's perfume and the promise of everything to come. I've never wanted anything more. They sat on the bench for a long time, watching the petals fall, talking about nothing and everything. Plans for the wedding, hopes for the future, the life they were building, one choice at a time. When they finally walked home, hand in hand, the sun was beginning to set. Lily was waiting on the porch with Mrs. Patterson bouncing with barely contained excitement. Did you do it? Did you ask her? Daniel laughed. How did you know I was going to ask her? Daddy. Lily rolled her eyes with the exasperation of a child who had long ago figured out the adults in her life. You practiced the speech. In the mirror. I heard you. You heard? The bathroom is right next to my room. Daniel felt heat rise to his face. He'd been so careful, so thorough, and his 5-year-old had known the whole time. Okay, he admitted. Yes, I asked her. Lily turned to Rachel with wide, expectant eyes. And you said yes? Rachel knelt down, putting herself at Lily's level. I said yes. So you're going to be my stepmom for real now? For real. Rachel's voice was soft, steady. If that's okay with you. Lily considered this with the gravity of a philosopher weighing a great question. Then her face split into a grin. That's very okay with me. She threw her arms around Rachel's neck, hugging tight. I always wanted a mom. Daddy told me about my first mom, and I love her too, but I wanted one I could hug. Rachel's eyes met Daniel's over Lily's shoulder. Something passed between them. Gratitude, wonder, the overwhelming weight of this moment. You can hug me anytime you want, Rachel said, her voice thick. That's a promise. Even when you're doing important CEO stuff. Especially then. Lily pulled back, satisfied. Good, because I have a lot of hugs, and I've been saving them. The wedding was set for autumn, 1 year from the day Rachel had taken the CEO position, a symmetry that felt right. They wanted something small, meaningful, a celebration of the family they'd built, rather than a spectacle for others to admire. The planning took months, but Rachel approached it with the same strategic precision she brought to everything. Vendors were interviewed, timelines were established. Lily was appointed official flower consultant, a role she took with tremendous seriousness. The flowers have to match sparkle and glitter, she announced one evening, presenting a crayon drawing of her specifications, purple and pink, and a little bit of gold. Dragons at a wedding? Rachel examined the drawing with the focus she normally reserved for quarterly reports. I think we can work with that. Really? Why not? It's our wedding. We can have whatever we want. Lily beamed. Best wedding ever. As the months passed, Daniel found himself thinking more and more about the path that had led him here, the grief that had nearly broken him, the survival mode that had become a prison, the lie that had set him free. He thought about Meredith too, not with the sharp pain of before, but with something gentler, gratitude for the time they'd had, acceptance of the time they hadn't. She had given him Lily, and Lily had given him a reason to keep going, and keeping going had eventually led him to Rachel. There was a logic to it, even if it didn't always make sense, a through line from loss to love, from ending to beginning. One evening, a few weeks before the wedding, Daniel took Lily to visit Meredith's grave. They hadn't gone in a while. The early years, Daniel had visited constantly, desperate to feel close to her. But as time passed, the visits had grown less frequent. Not because he'd forgotten, but because the grief had transformed into something that didn't need a physical location. She was with him always, in his heart, in his daughter's eyes. But this felt important. A way to close one chapter before opening another. Lily stood beside him, clutching a small bouquet of flowers, purple and pink, of course, studying the headstone with solemn curiosity. Do you think she can see us? I don't know, baby. Maybe. I hope she can. Lily placed the flowers carefully at the base of the stone. I want to tell her about Rachel and the wedding and how happy you are now. Daniel's throat tightened. What would you tell her? Lily thought about it, her small face scrunched in concentration. I'd tell her that Daddy smiles a lot more now, that he sings in the kitchen again, that Rachel makes really good hot chocolate and helps me with my homework and never laughs when I talk about dragons. She paused. I'd tell her that we're okay, that we're going to be a family, and that I know she's watching over us, even if she can't be here. That's beautiful, Lily. It's true. She looked up at him with those eyes, Meredith's eyes, full of certainty. She'd want you to be happy, right? Yeah. Daniel's voice cracked. I think she would. Then she's probably really happy right now, in heaven, because you found Rachel and we're getting married and everything is good. Everything is good. Daniel knelt down and pulled his daughter into a hug, holding her tight while the autumn wind stirred the leaves around them. I love you, Lily Brooks. I love you more, Daddy. She pulled back, brushing dirt from her knees with business-like efficiency. Can we get ice cream on the way home? I think Mom would want us to have ice cream. Daniel laughed, the sound startled out of him. Trust Lily to turn a graveyard visit into an ice cream opportunity. You know what? I think you're right. They walked back to the car together, hand in hand, leaving Meredith's grave behind but carrying her memory with them. Always. Forever. The wedding day arrived with perfect October weather. Crisp air, golden light, leaves turning colors like nature's own celebration. They'd chosen their own backyard for the ceremony. The house they'd built their life in, the space where they'd become a family. Chairs were arranged in neat rows. An arch covered in purple and pink and gold flowers. Lily's specifications, executed flawlessly, stood at the head of the aisle. The guest list was small. Mrs. Patterson, who cried from start to finish. Marcus, who had appointed himself unofficial photographer and was taking pictures with aggressive enthusiasm. A few colleagues, a handful of friends, Rachel's mother, Catherine, who couldn't stop smiling, and Thomas Monroe, standing at the front of the crowd, waiting to walk his daughter down the aisle. Daniel stood beneath the arch, watching the back door, his heart pounding. He'd been nervous before, job interviews, presentations, first dates, but nothing like this. This was different. This was everything. The music started. A simple acoustic arrangement, something Rachel had chosen. The back door opened. Lily emerged first, scattering petals with careful precision, her face set in an expression of tremendous concentration. She was wearing a dress she'd picked herself, purple, naturally, and her hair was done up with tiny flowers woven through the braids. When she reached the arch, she took her position beside Daniel, slipping her hand into his. You ready, Daddy? Ready as I'll ever be. Good, because here she comes. Daniel looked up. Rachel appeared in the doorway, and everything else disappeared. She was wearing white, Simple, elegant, nothing like the elaborate gowns he'd seen in magazines. Her hair was down, the way he loved it. She was holding a bouquet that matched the arch, and she was looking at him like he was the only person in the world. Thomas walked her down the aisle, his face a careful mask that couldn't quite hide the emotion beneath. When they reached the arch, he paused. "Take care of her," he said, and it wasn't a warning anymore. It was a blessing. "Always," Daniel replied. Thomas kissed Rachel's cheek, placed her hand in Daniel's, and stepped back. Daniel barely noticed. He was too busy looking at the woman who was about to become his wife. "Hi," Rachel whispered. "Hi yourself. You clean up nice? So do you. The dresses, if you say adequate, I will murder you at our own wedding." Daniel laughed, the tension breaking. "I was going to say perfect. You're perfect." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They'd written their own vows, Daniel agonizing over every word for weeks, Rachel producing hers in what she claimed was a single late-night session of inspiration. "Daniel," Rachel began, her voice steady despite the emotion shimmering in her eyes, "I spent my whole life building walls, protecting myself from anything that might slow me down or make me vulnerable. And then you showed up, this quiet, stubborn man who refused to be intimidated by my father and made pancakes in dragon shapes for a little girl who wasn't even his to impress. And suddenly the walls didn't seem so important anymore." She paused, glancing at Lily, who was watching with rapt attention. "You taught me that strength isn't about control. It's about showing up. Day after day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You showed me what real love looks like. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic declarations, but the small things, the consistency, the commitment." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "I spent so long thinking I didn't need anyone. And then I realized I didn't need you. I wanted you. There's a difference. Need is desperate. Want is a choice. And I choose you, Daniel Brooks. Today and every day after." Daniel blinked rapidly, trying to keep his composure. Then it was his turn. "Rachel," he started, and had to stop, clear his throat, start again. "A year and a half ago, you turned my life upside down with a single dinner invitation. I walked into your house expecting an awkward work obligation and walked out, well, terrified mostly, and confused, and wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into." Soft laughter from the crowd. "But here's the thing about being terrified. Sometimes it means you're standing on the edge of something important, something that will change you in ways you can't predict. That dinner changed me. You changed me." He looked at Lily, standing beside him with her purple dress and her flower-braided hair. "I used to think my job was to protect my daughter from the world, to build a life so safe and controlled that nothing could ever hurt her. But you showed me that protection isn't enough. Kids need to see their parents take risks. They need to see them fall in love, make mistakes, build something meaningful. They need to see that life is worth living, not just surviving." His eyes returned to Rachel. "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living, really living, and that's because of you. So thank you for crashing into my life with your ambush dinners and your terrifying father and your complete inability to take no for an answer. Thank you for seeing something in me worth loving, and thank you for giving Lily a mother she can hug." He took her hand, squeezing tight. "I choose you too, Rachel Monroe. Today and every day after, for as long as forever lasts." The officiant said the words. The rings were exchanged, and when Daniel kissed his bride, the applause that rose around them felt like the whole world celebrating. They'd done it. Against all odds, against all expectations. They'd built a family. The reception was held in the backyard under string lights that transformed the space into something magical. There was food and music and dancing, Lily twirling between adults with the tireless energy of childhood. Mrs. Patterson found Daniel near the dessert table, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice wavering. "You know that, right? From that first day you moved in, with that tiny baby and those terrified eyes, I knew you were going to be okay. I just knew it. I couldn't have done it without you. Nonsense. You did the hard part. I just watched and helped where I could." She patted his cheek with grandmotherly affection. "Meredith would be proud too, wherever she is." "I hope so," I know so. That girl loved you with everything she had, and she'd want this for you, the happiness, the family, all of it. Daniel hugged her, this woman who had become a grandmother to his daughter through sheer proximity and determination. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Later, as the night wound down and the stars emerged, Thomas Monroe approached Daniel with a glass of whiskey in each hand. Here, he offered one to Daniel. You've earned it. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the party continue around them. I was wrong about you, Thomas said finally. When we first met, I saw a single father with a modest job and too many obligations, and I thought my daughter was making a mistake. And now? Now I see a man who loves his family more than his own comfort. A man who turned down a career-making opportunity because being a father mattered more. A man who stood up to me, to my face, and didn't back down. Thomas took a sip of whiskey, his gaze distant. I spent my whole life measuring people by their ambition, their drive, their willingness to sacrifice everything for success. I thought that was strength. But watching you this past year, I've started to wonder if I had it backwards. How do you mean? Strength isn't about what you're willing to sacrifice. It's about what you're willing to protect. Thomas turned to face him directly. You protect your daughter. You protect my daughter. You protect this family you've built with a fierceness that doesn't make noise but doesn't waver either. That's real strength, Daniel, the kind that matters. Daniel didn't know what to say. This was, without question, the most Thomas Monroe had ever revealed to him. I'm not good at this, Thomas continued, his voice gruff. Apologies. Admissions. Catherine's always said I have the emotional range of a filing cabinet. A pause. But I want you to know that I was wrong, and I'm glad I was wrong, and I'm proud to have you in this family. He extended his hand. Daniel took it. The handshake was firm, decisive, the seal on something that had been building for over a year. Thank you, Thomas. That means more than you know. Don't let it go to your head. But there was warmth beneath the gruffness. Now go dance with your wife. You're wasting the music. Daniel found Rachel in the middle of the makeshift dance floor, swaying with Lily in her arms. The two of them were laughing at something, their faces lit by string lights and joy. Mind if I cut in? Daddy! Lily reached for him and he scooped her up, settling her on his hip. We were dancing. I saw. You're very good. Rachel taught me. Lily looked between them with the satisfaction of a child who had gotten exactly what she wanted. We're a family now, right? A real one? The realest, Rachel said. Good. Lily yawned, the excitement of the day finally catching up with her. I'm tired. Can I stay up anyway? Just a little longer, Daniel said. It's a special night. The most special. Lily rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes already drooping. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby. And I love you, Rachel. Rachel's voice caught. I love you too, sweetheart, so much. They stood together in the glow of the string lights, the three of them, swaying gently to music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Behind them, the party continued, laughter and conversation and the clinking of glasses. But in this moment, nothing else existed. Just them. Just this. Just home. Later that night, after Lily had been carried to bed and the last guests had gone, Daniel and Rachel sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. We did it, Rachel said. We did. I keep waiting to wake up, to find out this was all a dream. Daniel took her hand, lacing their fingers together. If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up. Smooth talker. I try. Silence settled between them, comfortable and complete. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the lingering sweetness of wedding cake. Daniel? Thank you. For what? For not running. That first night when I ambushed you with my parents, you could have walked out. You could have exposed me, embarrassed me, ended whatever this was before it started. But you stayed. I didn't have much choice. You had every choice. That's what made it matter. She squeezed his hand. You chose to stay, and then you kept choosing, over and over, even when I made it hard, even when my father made it impossible. You just kept showing up. That's what you do when you love someone. Most people don't. Most people run when things get complicated, when the reality doesn't match the fantasy. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes bright in the starlight. But you're not most people. Neither are you. No, she smiled, soft, certain. I guess we're perfect for each other. Guess so. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the stars, letting the magnitude of the day settle around them. What do you think happens now? Rachel asked eventually. Now? Daniel considered the question. Now we live. We raise Lily. We build something lasting. We fight sometimes and make up after. We have good days and bad days and ordinary days that somehow become the most precious ones of all. That sounds really nice, actually. It does, doesn't it? He pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I spent so long thinking I wasn't allowed to want things, that happiness was for other people, that my job was just to keep my head down and survive. And now? Now I know better. Now I know that wanting things isn't weakness, that letting people in isn't failure, that love, real love, the kind that shows up every day, is the bravest thing a person can do. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, a soft, wondering sound. Who knew the guy who made dragon pancakes would turn out to be a philosopher? Hidden depths. Apparently, she kissed him, soft and slow. I love you, Daniel Brooks. I love you too, Rachel Brooks. She pulled back, her eyes widening. Rachel Brooks. I hadn't thought about that. Does it sound weird? It sounds... She paused, trying out the words. Rachel Brooks. Rachel Monroe Brooks? Whatever you want. It's your name. Rachel Brooks. She said it again like she was tasting it. I think I like it. It feels like a new chapter, a fresh start. That's exactly what it is. They stayed on the porch until the stars began to fade, talking and not talking, together in the way that only comes from truly knowing someone. And when they finally went inside, Daniel paused at the threshold, looking back at the backyard where they'd said their vows. The arch was still standing, flowers slightly wilted now, chairs still arranged in neat rows. Tomorrow they'd clean it up, return to regular life, begin the long work of building a marriage instead of just planning a wedding. But tonight, this moment was perfect, a snapshot of everything he'd built and everything he'd become. Daniel Brooks, single father, designer, husband, a man who had learned through loss and love and endless ordinary days that showing up was the only thing that mattered. He closed the door and went to join his family. 3 months later, on a snowy evening much like the one that had started it all, Daniel sat in his home office, working on a project that would launch Monroe Creative into a new market. Rachel was in the living room, reviewing documents with one hand while helping Lily with a puzzle with the other. The sounds of their voices drifted through the house, Rachel explaining something about corner pieces, Lily insisting that dragons didn't follow puzzle rules. This was his life now. This impossible, beautiful, ordinary life. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Drinks Friday? Bring the wife. Still can't believe you're a married man. Daniel smiled and typed back, Can't. Lily has a dance recital. Rain check? Marcus. Of course she does. You're disgusting, you know that? Disgustingly happy. Daniel. It's a burden I bear. Marcus. Shut up. Fine. Next week. And you're buying. Daniel set the phone down, but the smile lingered. He thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, the one who left work at 5:30 sharp every day, who avoided attention, who had built his entire existence around not wanting things he couldn't have. That man had been so afraid, so careful, so convinced that happiness was a trap waiting to spring. And he'd been wrong, so beautifully, completely wrong. Happiness wasn't a trap, it was a choice. A series of choices made over and over every single day. The choice to show up, the choice to let people in, the choice to believe that you deserved good things, even when your own brain told you otherwise. Daniel had made those choices, was still making them, would keep making them for as long as he lived, because that was what love was, in the end. Not a feeling, but an action. Not a destination, but a journey. The accumulated weight of 1,000 small moments, building into something unshakable. He turned back to his work, but his mind was elsewhere. On Rachel in the other room, brilliant and commanding, and his. On Lily, growing up so fast, becoming her own person with her own dreams and dragons and questions about the world. On the life they were building together day by day, choice by choice. He thought about Meredith, too. He always would. But the grief didn't cut like it used to. It had become something softer, a presence rather than an absence, a reminder of what he'd had rather than what he'd lost. She would have loved this. All of it. The house, the family, the man Daniel had become. He carried her with him, always, but he no longer carried the weight of her death. That burden had transformed into something lighter, something that felt almost like gratitude. Thank you, he thought, for Lily, for showing me what love could be, for giving me a reason to keep going when I didn't think I could. He didn't know if she could hear him. He didn't know if there was anything beyond this life to hear, but it felt right to say it anyway, to acknowledge the thread that connected past to present, lost to love, ending to beginning. A knock at his office door interrupted his thoughts. Lily stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, clutching sparkle and glitter. "Daddy?" "Hey, baby, what's up?" "Rachel said I could stay up late because it's snowing. Can we build a snowman tomorrow?" "Absolutely." "With dragon wings?" "I don't know if snowmen have dragon wings." "This one will." Lily said it with the absolute certainty of a child who had never encountered a problem she couldn't solve with imagination. "Also, Rachel said to tell you dinner is ready and you have to come now or she's eating your portion." Daniel laughed. "Well, I wouldn't want that." "Me neither. Rachel makes really good spaghetti." He saved his work and stood, lifting Lily into his arms as he headed for the kitchen. She was getting heavier, 5 years old and growing like a weed. But he wasn't ready to stop carrying her yet. These moments were finite. He knew that better than most. Rachel was at the stove, wearing an apron over her business clothes, looking completely ridiculous and completely perfect. "There you are. I was about to send a search party. Lily said you'd eat my portion." "I would have. I'm hungry." Daniel set Lily down at the table and crossed to Rachel, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Hi, wife." "Hi, husband." She leaned back into him, still stirring the sauce. "How's the project?" "Good. Almost done." "That's what you said yesterday." "This time I mean it." "Sure you do." Lily was watching them with an expression of tolerant amusement, like a parent observing children who hadn't quite figured out how to behave. "You guys are gross," she announced. "The grossest," Rachel agreed. "Can we eat now? I'm hungry." "Patience," Daniel said. "Good things come to those who wait. That's what you always say, and then we wait and the food gets cold." "She has a point," Rachel said. Daniel laughed and released her, moving to set the table. This was it. This was everything. The ordinary magic of a family eating dinner together, bickering and laughing and being completely, wonderfully present. As he placed the plates, he caught Rachel's eye across the kitchen. She smiled at him, that private smile, the one that was just for him, and he felt his heart swell with something that had no name. Gratitude. Joy. Love so big, it almost hurt. He smiled back, and in that moment, Daniel Brooks knew with absolute certainty that he had everything he'd ever wanted. Not the corner office, or the prestigious title, or the salary that proved his worth. Just this. Family. Home. Love. The small things, done over and over, until they became unshakable. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Tomorrow they would build a snowman with dragon wings. Next week they would face new challenges. In a month, a year, a decade, there would be triumphs and failures and everything in between. But tonight, this moment, was perfect. And Daniel had learned, after everything, that perfect moments were worth holding on to. He sat down at the table with his wife and his daughter, reached for their hands, and held on tight.